Welcome to Happy Times and Places, with me, Toby Hadoke.
Hi Toby, it's Simon Guerrier here. I am one of those writers. I write for Big Finish and BBC Books and for Doctor Who magazine and stuff. I've chosen for you The Evil of the Daleks from 1967, in which the Daleks' diabolical plot involves them running an antique shop.
Well, hello. Night has drawn in, and it's time for a spooky classic. The first missing episode I've done. So without further ado, in whatever form you're going to watch it, or if you're not, hello, I'll try to explain the pictures as best I can. It's Evil of the Daleks, episode 1. Press play now. Well, how exciting and also terrifying. I mean, I'm quite excited now because Evil of the Daleks is a bona fide classic. It's also 7 episodes long and mostly missing. So how enthusiastic am I going to remain tonight? The Evil of the Daleks. I often write just Evil of the Daleks, but it is The Evil of the Daleks. I'm not great on exactness of things like that. The Evil of the Daleks. I know it's Horror of Fang Rock, isn't it? It's not The Horror of Fang Rock. So, a shot of some stock footage of Gatwick. And then, of course, the TARDIS is being taken away. So this connects with the end of The Faceless Ones. But, of course, because of the way production was done then, this isn't Gatwick. Of course, in the old days, I like these pictures of Troughton and Jamie, which I saw quite late in the day. Are they from the designer? Wherever they're from, they weren't in the usual run of pictures printed for Evil, which were largely Victoria in her dress and Maxtable and Waterfield in the lab, and the fighting the fighting Daleks and the Emperor Dalek. But so that wasn't filmed at Gatwick because it was part of this production block. But of course, if that was done now, you'd get whichever unit was on the previous story and go, right, we've got a couple of scenes at the beginning. So we'll capture those for the next show. But no, having just been at Gatwick Airport not that long previously, you then have to do it. I think it was somewhere near the BBC, wasn't it? Some hangars. Now then, Bob Hall is played by Alec Ross, who is only in this episode of Doctor Who. It's his only... But he was married at the time to somebody who would go on to be in Doctor Who. He was married to Sheila Hancock. So Bob Hall was married to Helen A. But sadly, Alec Ross died not long after this. He died in 71, 72 of esophageal cancer, which has a rather sad symmetry for Sheila Hancock because it's also what John Thaw died of. I'm not too maudlin, am I? Why do I know this stuff? Why do I know the personal tragedies of actors? It's because the actors always spoke to me. I think it's, middle of nowhere. The idea that you could be, a name on a cast list and you could spend your time pretending to be other people. Very appealing, and I imagine that sort of exciting life. And so reading about Evil of the Daleks when I was younger, the headline news is, of course, Victoria's first story, but mostly, the black and white Daleks fighting at the end. So not much heed was given to episode 1, which is very much a setup, isn't it? Because it all takes place in the present day. Well, no. It all takes place a year in the past because it's set on the same day or what is it, 20th of July 1966? Don't write in. I don't want. I think you're all fines. This is all guesswork. 20th of July 66, which is the day Some of the War Machines takes place on, which is also the day the end of the Faceless Ones takes place on, which is what gives Ben and Polly their excuse to leave rather unceremoniously last week. John Bailey, wonderful actor. He has a very broken quality, doesn't he? And was a broken man the last time he was in Doctor Who, because he's the commander in episode 6 of The Censorites, the sort of Ben Gunn character, the guy who's still fighting the war in episode 6 of The Censorites. And that character too has a sort of broken dignity about him that Waterfield also has. There's a real sort of sadness behind the eyes and a slight reediness in the voice that suggests melancholia to me. It's a nice mystery, isn't it? This although Mr. Perry is also not massively modern, it's the nice mystery of Waterfield with his century-old way of conducting himself, but Mr. Perry with his what are they called? You know what I mean? Buttonhole and manner is also a bit of a sort of relic. But I'm from a time when see, I'm as old as Waterfield. I am from a time when this story was completely missing. And the idea that an episode of this would come back, it was, oh God, horrible reading this. When you first got the idea that Doctor Who had missing episodes, they went, I wonder which ones are missing. Oh, what? Power of the Daleks and Evil of the Daleks and the Web of Fear and the Dalek Master Plan. Oh, come on. So, of course, they were the most missed. But then as you get older, and I think one likes the idea of being away from the crowd, and everyone else goes, I love Power and Evil. And you go, yeah, everyone loves the Dalek stories. I'm more interested in the esoteric strangeness of the Macra Terror. It's the sort of mental games you play with yourself. And I think as I got to know Evil, so I'm interested to see what happens later on, is that the middle episodes seem like quite a long fight between Jamie and Kemmel. And on the soundtrack, you don't know what's going on. So I always see those as a bit of a lull. And of course, the early setup is quite Dalek-light. So I think I went through a phase of thinking of this as a story that only really kicks in once the Daleks start playing trains and being a bit weird. And then the Civil War on Skaro, which is the headline. And I think when you discover a story like Evil of the Daleks, having seen all those pictures, you assume it's just 7 episodes of sort of wall-to-wall Dalek fighting, and then you go, that doesn't actually happen till the end. Why didn't they just do that more? But it's interesting because when you go to, well, we'll see at the end. Let's talk about the beginning. So Alec Ross is also the father of the actress Abigail, or I think Melanie Thor, who was adopted by John Thor when Sheila Hancock married John Thor. So she is the sister of Abigail Thor, but actually they have different fathers. And this is Griffith Davis as Kennedy, who is still about, I think. I've never had contact with him, but I think a friend of mine has had a signed picture. He's got that sort of spivvy quality about him. In fact, I say spiv. I think they offered the part to James Beck, who was the spiv Walker in Dad's Army. And that spivvy sort of modern sort of thuggery is quite... You don't see many characters like that in 60s Doctor Who, or you don't think you do, and I don't think of you doing so. And it gives it a sort of... It gives us a modernity and a and a sort of realism, although he's a sort of type, but because he's not space age or historical, and those are the sort of two at this stage in 60s black and white Doctor Who. The idea of Doctor Who in the modern day is unusual. Well, hang on, let's think about it. The War Machines is the first in the modern day. Then Faceless Ones, although yes, all right, a year in the past, and then this. So this is only the 11th episode of Doctor Who. Oh, there's a bit in The Chase, I know. I think you'll find, and Planet of Giants, but the headline news there is the fact that everybody's shrunk. Okay, but in terms of so I think give me a pass on Planet of Giants. But say so it's Planet of Giants. It's not Planet of the Giants. I like. It's interesting. This is very much set up. But what's really interesting about this is the way that Whittaker sort of writes the Doctor piecing the clues together. This is a whole episode of the Doctor trying to find out what's happened to his TARDIS. And you sort of plot-wise, you can sort of dispense with it. But we have a mystery. And as the Doctor begins to solve the mystery, we don't know this yet, but he's walking into a trap. So, and that's actually, I think, a really interesting dynamic, because in a way, the Daleks are harnessing the fact that he's going to go Kennedy, he's going to follow the matches to the tricolor. The fact that he's intelligent and smart and will work stuff out actually leads him into a trap. So he is hoisted by his own petard. He is trapped by the fact that he's capable of solving the mystery. Yeah, he's very urgent, isn't he? And very sort of, yeah. I like what he brings to it because Mr. Perry is so posh and Mr. Waterfield is, obviously he has this oldie worldy thing about him because, oh, hang on, he's from the past. And it is a story that sort of moves from place to place. It's not a static tale at all. But yeah, another handsome. That's nice. And this is what, the first 7-parter since Marco Polo. Gosh. So you can afford this episode of sort of creeping mystery. We're sort of in the dark, but also crucially, the Doctor is in the dark. But yeah, this was. I've got to work out what Simon Guerrier might like about this, and he's a writer, so I suspect I don't think he'll be picking any of the performances. I certainly again, this is an episode I would have sort of dismissed. When I was just, because I don't have the soundtrack to this anymore. I'm watching a reconstruction. I did have the BBC Audio CD narrated soundtrack, and I lent it to somebody, and they've not given it me back. I was sorting through all of my stuff. I've got a few gaps in my collection that you go, well, where's that gone over the years? And I tend to think of myself as guarding my Doctor Who material like a hawk, but these recons, which are from a lovely bunch of people called Loose Cannon, I ended up on my own, having ended a relationship. It was ended for me. I never ended them myself. And I was at a bit of a loose end and rattling about on my own, and I discovered these recons, and so I sent off for them, and it was great because I made my own CD covers. I didn't do all the artwork. There was places you could get it online, but to match the DVD covers, and I bought DVD boxes to make so that they all matched on the shelf, and that was sort of quite a nice project. It's great how we can be creative, and also there's something about the archaeology of filling the gaps of Doctor Who, and in fact I'd counter that's as much of the fun of Doctor Who as the stories is all of the actual experience of discovering it, or in this case filling the gaps. And I had quite a right old time getting the recons, and they have a few extra bits and interviews with them. But it's fine, you can sit down and watch an approximation of Evil of the Daleks. It's amazing, really, that the amount of effort that's gone into recreating something that was shown, just a couple of times. And I started filling my gaps on my shelf and making the covers, and because I was now single, and then I met somebody else and sort of stopped. So I've still got some gaps. Really, I need to become appalling to live with and be left on my own again in order to complete the few little gaps on my shelf. Although the animations are now making good. That isn't it extraordinary? I mean, the idea that I first experienced the whole of Evil of the Daleks with a cassette tape that sounded like it had been recorded underwater in a sock. Actually, the quality of Evil wasn't too bad. And my goodness, huddled in my bedroom with a tape recorder, listening. This was better quality than a lot. I mean, Fury from the Deep, what you thought was the heartbeat going all the way through was just the tape going. But I like that, and I would counter that, I'm not countering anything. I would contend that the fact that lots of this Doctor Who is missing actually makes Doctor Who more interesting, which is an awful thing to say, but that great feeling of loss, one, it spurned this sort of creativity, but also the fact that we covet something that we haven't got. It's what archaeology is about, isn't it? And so then picks up. There were no telesnaps when I was younger, so a lot of these photos there was no access to. I remember when I first saw a telesnap of Power of the Daleks at the back end of a book called Doctor Who: The Early Years. Suddenly, like, what, pictures taken off the screen? And then suddenly, there's pictures taken off the screen of loads of Doctor Who episodes. And then it's like, wow, we've got telesnaps for everything. Oh, except season 3. Oh, so now season 3 has a special thing because we don't have telesnaps for it, whereas we do have telesnaps for the other thing. And then a sensor clip comes back here, and then and that sort of gradual rebuilding. But I think the fact missing episodes fascinate me. I think because we imagine them, we piece them together. People do this clever stuff. We have to work things out. I mean, I know that with some of these recons, they even use, get screen grabs of the extras. And I mean the extras, the background artists from other things, and put them on to get them as accurate as possible. Now, the Tricolor Coffee Bar. Now, this is interesting again because you've got music. I remember there being a big worry that should there ever be a commercial release of Evil of the Daleks, the missing thing. But we're still worried about those things. Because there's modern music, isn't there? There's paperback writing, which isn't this. I can't really hear it. But because it had Beatles music, and Beatles music was, a definite no-no. It would be too expensive to license. It was kind of, well, if this... Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, because did Jamie just ask about, is it the chameleons, and then the music fades, and that I love the music in this. The music feels like it's on the way to an epic as well. Oh, and that, isn't it? That this Dalek theme, but that sort of fluting underplay as well. It's like Dudley Simpson has got a memo to say this story is really important and we're building up to something. Because this is, as I say, this is an episode of investigation, but it has a real atmosphere about it, and it has a sense of build, which I know in this modern age, and I'm not saying I'm immune to this. We're itching for the story to begin. We're itching for the Daleks to be in it. but of Doctor Who fans of old, even if Daleks are in the title, they don't appear to the end of episode 1. That's just going to happen. Yeah. Paperback writer. But of course, and I just assumed, they've gone for modern music, but it was years later that, of course, again, because it's the 20th of July 1966, no, it's music from a year ago. Which again would mean something slightly different to an audience at the time than it does to us, because 66, 67 to us, it's the past. Coffee bar's a funny thing. Has he got one of those see-through cups? Yeah, I remember those see-through coffee cups. Oh God, I mean, how space age is that? They look terribly dated now. I think that's what one is. It doesn't matter to make the point, because I'm sure we had some of those kicking about. Because our house was full of old... We couldn't afford anything new. Our house was full of old stuff. Yeah, see-through coffee cups. They seem so exciting. I was going to say, the idea that you'd go for a coffee now. People spend a fortune on coffee. I'm not much of a coffee drinker. But, I sometimes think of a coffee bar as... There's a bit in Quatermass 2... where Quatermass meets somebody at a coffee bar, and the waitress bemoans the fact that people are all going to tea bars these days. Fashion, she says. That's all it is. Fashion. It's one of those scenes that they're clear to give an actor time to get from one set to the other. This rather put upon waitress. So yeah, coffee bars. They're very... I was going to say that one. I've just made my point because, I mean, gosh, Quatermass 2 is 12 years before this. Isn't that extraordinary? That, again, sort of, black and white sci-fi all sort of rolls into one. But that's 12 years. That's Unearthly Child to Genesis of the Daleks. Polo neck jumper. Doesn't Jamie wear one of those later? Was the costume budget quite small? Yes, when Kennedy's out, give Jamie his jumper. It's only just occurred to me that the time difference between Quatermass 2 and this. That's extraordinary. And we still haven't seen the Daleks, but and he's been quite a key character, but he's actually here just pretty much now to make this discovery, as we'll discover. He's not going to be long for this. I did like that bit in the coffee bar when the music went down and the Doctor went, "Oh, it's something much more serious." I only bring that up again because I don't think I gave it enough attention. Yeah, and so it's not just the Doctor who's investigating. Kennedy is curious, so in a way the audience are going, okay, even the baddie doesn't quite know exactly what's going on. But of course he's got a perfectly plausible motive. He's a crook, isn't he? So I think he's gonna and of course this is going to start moving in a minute, because the end of episode 1 and the beginning of episode 2 are the same. I don't know if it was restaged or not. So actually what happened in episode 1 might have been marginally different. But of course this was the first bit I ever saw of Evil of the Daleks, because I'd seen The Wheel in Space episode 6, which has the clip of Kennedy and the Dalek. Amazing in those days that you'd watch another episode, and part of the fun of watching it is because it had got a clip of a missing episode in it. And then of course an episode turns up that is annoyingly it's the one that's got the missing clip in it, and here it is. I love that music. It's real, and that's great. It's great, and it is a sort of deadly version of the Doctor Who theme, isn't it? A really sort of and that's great, because the Daleks reflected in the thing, and then you've got the shot through the safe. That's a great piece of music. Yep, we're on our way to an epic. And there we go. Yes, and for years I wasn't sure if... Because I think some sources, would say, and then Kennedy is exterminated. I was never sure if Kennedy dying was the end of the episode, but it's not. It's seeing the Dalek. Who's voiced by Roy Skelton for the first time, which is odd because Peter Hawkins is also on board, and he was your main Dalek man. But the sole Dalek here is Roy Skelton. Now, well, I enjoyed that. I hope you did too. I mean, the sort of episode I would usually sort of dismiss and, pay lip service to because it's a setup, isn't it? But actually, I think what I'm going to choose about that is I very much liked the conceit of the Doctor solving a series of puzzles. It's very Doctorish. It's interesting that we've gone back to the show's original script editor. The Doctor is sort of detective, smart, otherworldly detective. But I also like the fact that all that problem solving is doing is leading him further into the web that is to enmesh him. So the Doctor's detective work and the dramatic irony therein. God. What has Simon Guerrier chosen? He's a very clever fellow, so I'm sure he's chosen something better than me.
My best thing about episode 1 of The Evil of the Daleks is that even though this is one of the 97 missing episodes of Doctor Who, I think that both the beginning and the end still exist. Well, maybe. The ending certainly does. It's repeated at the start of episode 2 and also features in the Wheel of Space episode 6, both of which exist. But according to the camera script, the opening shot of Evil of the Daleks episode 1 is stock footage of Gatwick Airport, and surely they use material shot on location at Gatwick for the Faceless Ones, episode 1 of which exists. So maybe they use some of that, but we don't know. We don't know! Anyway, that's my best thing about episode 1. Or at least the thing that keeps me awake at night.
Well, that's a great point. Oh, I see he's going to be clever, isn't he, Simon? Because that's not a thing. That's a sort of thing. I have asked people to choose their favourite thing, and a couple of people have said, can you clarify what you mean by a thing? And it's like, well, what do you think by a thing? And that's definitely a thing, if not a thing. That's a great... Cool, yes, and I sort of did talk about that, didn't I? I actually think Charles Norton very recently, when we were working on the Faceless Ones DVD, the animation, he sourced all of the footage, and much of the aeroplane footage, if not all, was not shot by the Doctor Who production team for Faceless Ones. They were given stock footage, or they got stock footage, some of which was colour, and still is colour. So it's highly likely that the opening shot of Evil of the Daleks exists. A shot was used at the beginning of this recon. It was moving, and there's no reason to assume that they got it wrong, or and that it's yes. So I like that. The beginning and the end of Evil of the Daleks episode 1 is what I was talking about the archaeology. I mean, I thought I'd talk about it because I thought it was interesting. I didn't think to identify it as the fab thing about episode 1, but it is a fab thing about episode 1 that presumably one day we'll be able to piece all of the missing episodes of Doctor Who together by the little bits of them that we find in little corners of the world. Well, look, I've got a feeling we're on our way to an epic. Well, welcome viewers and listeners, or viewers or listeners, you can't be both. This is exciting because these are the only moving pictures I'm going to see all night. It's the existing episode of Evil of the Daleks, episode 2. It is available on the Lost in Time DVD collection. That's how I'm watching it. I have it on the select episode menu. I've got to the page that has the particular episode on, so all I have to do is press enter or select or whatever, which I am going to do in 3, 2, 1. And I did it, but there's a delay. So, I mean, good luck to anybody that tries to sync up exactly with this. But anyway, hello, it's the opening titles. This was so exciting. This Lost in Time DVD set, I think, still remains my favourite set, my favourite DVD of the whole collection, just because when I started collecting... oh, that's interesting. The Evil of the Daleks, episode 2 by David Whittaker. I'm sure episode 1 it said Evil of the Daleks by David Whittaker. Episode 1. I'm sure somebody's got a blog about such things. There is definitely a blog. There's a website by a chap called Gavin Rymil about which different Daleks are used. I'm pretty good at spotting which actors are which or whatever, but his work on which Dalek props get used in which is absolutely fascinating. So I direct you to that. It's an amazing thing. And addresses a mystery that I will talk about in a later episode. So I knew this clip because it was at the end of Wheel in Space 6, which I'd seen many, many times in terrible quality. But it's like, this is all that we have of Evil of the Daleks. And then Evil of the Daleks turns up and begins with the bit we know. So, but now this was all new. And this is this. I mean, I suppose I have to talk about Derek Martinez this week because this is the only example we have of his direction. But that's a lovely moving shot of the close-up of the antique clock, then the quick pan to the door, and the Doctor again being this very clever investigatory chap who, you know, knows to silence a bell with his fingers as they come in. And yes, they're early for them, and there's something about this being at night time, and of course being surrounded by all this ancient ephemera. Well, not ancient, but oldie worldy. I've got to think of a better word. Fusty. Frazer Hines does his best. He knocks that prop, but he makes sure he's holding on to it before he does. It's very good work, Frazer. You don't want to cost the BBC some china. But of course, it's almost like, you know, the TARDISes of the future that we see that are sort of, or the idea we have of a TARDIS or of a time traveller who acquires, you know, who gets their stuff from different places. So there's lots of different older artifacts that give you a sort of sense of atmosphere and a sense of time. And I love that the TARDIS in the TV movie, which has all that, where the futuristic is made out of wooden panels and stuff, and all of this old stuff, and the Doctor whispering in the darkness. You know, although we're in 1966, 67, it's telling us about it's invoking the past, and of course, Jamie is right here. Jamie is saying, and this is the sort of thing the meddling monk could do, actually. You go, yeah, well, what I've done is I'll set up an antique shop. It's exactly what the meddling monk would do. In fact, I'm surprised. Well, I'm not surprised, but if we did this nowadays, the idea that somebody's got this wheeze where they go, oh, I'm selling genuine antiques, but you haven't thought to break it or dent it, you know. And that's another clue. It's another clue for the Doctor to actually get wrong, and not the first thing he gets wrong this week, which I rather like. That's interesting. I don't know what. Having said I like the fact that the Doctor very cleverly pieces together the bits, he also gets things wrong. I'm not sure what David Whittaker's. I wonder if that's going back to the original concept of the Doctor as the anti-hero, the Doctor who, you know. I mean, he deliberately sabotages the fluid link in the Daleks, doesn't he? But he gets things wrong. He's flawed because he makes that mistake, whereas Jamie is correct. Poor old Edward Waterfield. But yeah, all this antique stuff gives it atmosphere. And Derek Martinez is a brilliant director. He's one of the great Doctor Who. Look at that moving, that very fluid camera. And this music, it's really going. This is bad news. Martinez's productions always sort of strive for realism. I was going to say, and the costumes are always very plausible, because I was thinking of, Dr. Barclay and his jumper in the 10th Planet, and, they don't do sort of wacky future. But then I remembered the Ice Warriors, where everyone's dressed like they've left their clothes out to dry, and Jackson Pollock's wandered in with his paintbrush. And sprayed them plastic as well. But there's always they're always cast to the hilt. Mr. K. Perry, I'm being very clever. You're called Kenneth. No, you were after Kennedy. This guy's called Keith. One of the few Doctor Who Keiths, he says, and then I'll now remember loads, because there's Chang in The Wheel in Space. I think he's called Keith Chang. And in a performance that we can't see, which probably saves us a lot of trouble. And Sir Keith Gold, Christopher Benjamin, who I think was considered for the role of Toby in this. We'll talk about that later. Ooh, I'm having a Bakewell tart flavoured naked bar. I'm not advertised by them or anything. I'm not sponsored by them or anything. We just had a pleasingly almond taste. And that's a shame that lovely photo of Patrick Troughton's been torn in half. Now, Perry is played by Geoffrey Colville. Sort of actor, those sorts of parts were sort of parts that Jonathan Cecil would have played. Sort of hello, ciao, yes, jolly chaps. I think he'd been in Emergency Ward 10. Well, the main thing I know about Geoffrey Colville is that he was, for a while, he went out with an actress called Monica Gray, who was in I mentioned it last episode, Quatermass 2. She plays Paula Quatermass in Quatermass 2. I went to her house when I was younger and chatted to her, and she told me about that because she dated David Croft, the sitcom writer. And she said she'd also seen for a while an actor called Geoffrey Colville. So that's what I know about him. I can't promise it's all going to be gold like this, that man went out with an actress that most of you probably don't know particularly well. But if you like Doctor Who, I would urge you to watch Quatermass if you can. I haven't even mentioned how brilliant Troughton is. I sort of have to be careful not to take to, because I know the things I take for granted. You don't. He's so good, the way he scampers about, and the way those eyes are so busy with activity. Now I've got that's now. Why do I know this? That wasn't his hand holding the picture, because of course you wouldn't get the camera in. It's a clever piece of direction. The actor holding the picture is Barry Ashton, who comes in later as the policeman. And he'd been in Doctor Who in a credited role earlier. He's one of the scientists in the moon base. He gets killed on the moon surface with Victor Pemberton. So Victor Pemberton is Jules. So Barry Ashton is Franz. And he pops up in a couple of fairly thankless roles in the Pertwee era. He plays Proctor, Dr. Cook's assistant in the first couple of episodes of The Time Monster. And he also is a sidekick. He's Ray Lunnon's sidekick. It doesn't really have many lines in the first couple of episodes of Frontier in Space. Barry Ashton. All I know about him is that people say he was a lovely Welsh actor, but he's not credited in this. But he doubles up as the policeman, and also he can say he's played the Doctor, because he's the Doctor's. I mean, you only saw his index finger and his thumb. The Doctor's thumb. That'd be a good title for an autobiography. I was the Doctor's thumb. You didn't look at that, Frazer. Frazer does that twice in this episode, because he does it later when he asks about the painting of There's Barry Ashton, the painting of Victoria Waterfield's mum. He goes, "Who's that in the picture?" He hasn't looked at it. He didn't look at that there, but he did do that thing where he touched the panel and pulled his hand away, which he also does in Web of Fear, which I always thought there was a mistake in the Web of Fear. And Griffith Davis as Kennedy has just been... He died at the beginning of this episode, so he's just spent the whole episode as a corpse. But it's not a double, and of course because he had to act his death. So actually that happens a few, because Bernard Holly does that, I think, in Tomb of the Cybermen. He dies at the end of episode 1, but he's there in episode 2, dead. I think Nick Zaran as Lieutenant Sorba in the Space Pirates. He dies at the end of episode 4, I'm guessing, or maybe episode 3. Episode 4, 3 or 4. 3. And I remember he has to come back to reenact his death, and then he's a corpse. Whereas, of course, it's a different one. But that means you'd have to come back for because everything was done, on a weekly basis. Whereas now, you'd get all your stuff done and then you'd be sent home. I love Molly Dawson. Joe Rowbottom, who has a lovely ticklish voice and a really sweet quality. Molly Dawson, she's very much a sort of character type, but she's so delightful. I think she auditioned to play Victoria, and this was her compensation. But I think she's absolutely brilliant. And I think Molly Dawson is companion material. Oh, look at that. Marius Goring. I mean, a star, a movie star. Was big news about that an actor like Goring was in Doctor Who. And I think, he would be able to say, give me a marvellous costume and a fantastic beard, and I shall be in Doctor Who. And he's great, and he really enjoys himself. But, I mean, an actor of his stature being in Doctor Who lent it massive credibility. This is we sometimes think of the guest stars we get today. Well, there's Goring at this time could compete with any of them. He's in A Matter of Life and Death, the Powell Pressburger film, and he's brilliant in it, playing a French a French phantom, a Pimpernel type. He was the Scarlet Pimpernel as well, wasn't he? He was the Scarlet Pimpernel on radio and television. And in those days, I think the billing for this in the Radio Times goes starring Patrick Troughton as Doctor Who and Marius Goring as Theodore Maxtable. I mean, and the companions actually got quite short shrift. I think Patrick Troughton as Doctor Who, Marius Goring, and then I think with John Bailey and Frazer Hines. He's so sad. And look at those that's a worried forehead, isn't it? That poor old Waterfield has. He's great casting, John Bailey. Yeah, Derek Martinez is brilliant at casting. And that was a picture, wasn't it? The picture on the wall of the wife, the late wife. That just makes him sad as well. He's got a dead wife. Is Deborah Watling painted over, I think, by the designer Chris Thompson. And here she is, for the first time, the beautiful and fabulous Deborah Watling. God, look at those eyes. She's but she wasn't first row. They cast Denise Buckley, didn't they? Who is very good in a episode of The Prisoner called The Dance of the Dead, with Mary Morris as number 2. She plays a maid in that, but it's a decent part, and she's great in it. She's really plucky and perky and obtuse, and yeah, it's a really good performance. I like Denise Buckley. I don't know an awful lot about her, but she's great in that Prisoner episode, and she was cast as Victoria. I don't know why it fell through, but then Deborah Watling comes in. Oh, I think they saw Gabrielle Drake as well, who I've worked with since, who's a very classy lady, and Lance Travers, who was married to Ronald Pickup, and Joe Rowbottom and Deborah Watling. This is brilliant. I love this. It's so because the Dalek has no idea that the reason she's lost weight is because she's under great emotional distress. And I think that's really sophisticated and just a really lovely touch, a really intelligent touch, and quite harrowing for the character. And I love the way that when the Daleks look back, there's something really waspish about them. And the fact that it's looking down because she's down, and the way that it's shot. They're really malevolent. It's funny that prop can be made to seem so malevolent just by the angle of its eye stalk. And I love it. I love the looking back. But that's a very clever observation about the Daleks, is the Daleks are so literal and so harsh that they wouldn't comprehend that she's lost weight, not because, well, I've got presumably she's not eating because she's hungry as well, but that it's actually more complex than just have fuel, you will stay a decent weight or whatever. I love this lab. The design work in this story is great. I'm sure that spiral staircase is in Doctor Who again, or has been in it already. I love it. Yes, I think I should have a cigar, and I think I should have a cutthroat razor to do whatever it is that one does with cigars. That's when you're an actor with a bit of clown. I think I should have a prop in this scene. You've already got a big beard, funky glasses, and a brilliant costume. Yes, and I shall also have a cigar. I would like a cutlass for episode 5. I love the dialogue that Maxtable is given, all that stuff about, when he says, it's just little things like when he says J. Clark Maxwell rather than James Clark Maxwell. I don't know why that gives it a certain class, but it does. It appeals to me. I'm easily pleased. Because I've heard of, this is it, by J. Clark Maxwell. I love that. I'm not a scientist, and I understand. I remember when there's a wonderful book that came out when I was a student called The Discontinuity Guide, which was the first it was so loving, and yet it took the mickey. And I've since sort of fallen out of love with the taking of the mickey of Doctor Who, because I think we get lofty about the past at our peril. And I don't like Doctor Who archly because it's a bit rubbish. I like Doctor Who because I think it's absolutely brilliant and the best thing ever, and it was magical to me as a kid, and I don't want to lose that magic. And I think so I get a bit cross when things are a bit, cock a snook. But actually, as a student, that book was so refreshing because, and it is because I'm not knocking the book, because it's a really good book, and it's very loving as well as critical where it needs to be, and it's very well written. It's got a funny turn of phrase. But I remember being slightly disappointed with the write-up of this, because instead of going, it's got the Black Daleks and the human factor and the Emperor, it sort of says it papers over its scientific implausibilities with a confident swagger. And I couldn't really get an angle on what they were talking about. But actually, then when you immerse yourself in the story and all of its stuff with, a magnetic man, and Maxtable's after alchemy, and that very intangible idea of the human factor and the Dalek factor, which are pretty basic. I love this. I remember when I first saw this scene, and the fact that it's in shocking close-up for the Doctor, and that music, and look at his face. This is big stuff. Troughton is selling this 100%, but also it's really well shot, and the music helps, and the way that the Dalek speaks as well. It's an absolutely brilliant scene. I love that, and the fact that the Doctor is standing up straight, but you can tell he's absolutely terrified. And again, there's so much going on behind those eyes. He's fearful, but he's standing up to it. I love that sort of indignation that he has, that foot stamp and indignation that has a childlike quality to it, but look at that keen intelligence he gives. I love that scene. And Waterfield's there going, I'll tell you, but no, honestly, please, sir. you coward. He's so good. I love that scene. And I remember when this episode came back, and a lot of Doctor Who can be quite disappointing. It doesn't match your imagination. I love this little scamper he does. What have you done with your infernal meddling? That's a great line. And that sudden panic, and then it's gone. That's clever as well. But I love that. And I remember that scene, and me going, no, these missing scenes when they come back, they are not disappointments. That is, I am so thrilled we can see that. I love that confrontation between Troughton and the Dalek. He's so good. It's so good. I think the Daleks are so familiar to us, so ubiquitous, that I think we sometimes forget how, when they're at their best, or when their import is underlined really well, they are. You suddenly remember, no, these are a big deal. Look at that face, shot brilliantly. Oh yeah, Jamie, you've got a hangover, mate. I love the fact that she's so delighted. I also want to know what this drink is that she's got that makes your hangover disappear. I could have done with that a lot in the olden days. Again, another example of Derek Martinez having an eye for custody, because Joe Rowbottom had a very decent career, and you can tell why. The camera loves her. She's great. She's got such a lovely quality, and this is Bridget Forsyth, a terrific actress. You can tell she's a good actress because my mum always went, she's very good, she is. And if my mum doesn't notice things like that, because she was in Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads, so she was a bit of a household name when I was growing up learning about Doctor Who. And when I first got a cast for Evil of the Daleks in Doctor Who magazine episode guide, and you went, okay, so who's, oh, wow, Mariska and John Bailey, big actors, but you haven't looked at the portrait, Jamie. Jamie has not looked at the portrait. That's twice in one episode he's gone, what's that, without looking at it. Naughty Frazer. Although I adore Frazer Hines. We will get onto that later. He is so good. He's worth his weight in gold. But that, you've got Bridget Forsyth. You've got Windsor Davis about to come on. Here he is, Windsor Davis, who, again, when I was discovering Doctor Who, was a household name. He was in It Ain't Our Fault, Mum, where he created a television icon in the Sergeant Major, Lofty Singh. He's also one of the Doctor Who actors that's got to number one in the charts, because he got to number one with Whispering Grass. But he was, so reading this, you got Bridget Forsyth, Windsor Davis. So these are actors that have a future, but have been spotted, used early by Derek Martinez, which adds sort of retrospective class. We wouldn't have known it at the time, but you look back at it and go, not only was it a good story at the time, it was a good story in the sense that when you look back on it, you go, and also that they got people who'd got a great future. So top marks to Derek Martinez, not only for the way that it looks. I think you're helped as well by the fact that it's a period setting. I think I love the historicals, but understand that they don't float everybody's boat. But historical and sci-fi together is a heady combination. It's the Yeti on the loo in Tooting Bec, but that's present. That was John Pertwee saying it's always scary if something's if something alien appears in the present day, but actually that futuristic alien juxtaposition with something ancient and fusty, I think, is even more beguiling, and is from, because the BBC do costume drama so well, and the fact that then you've got Doctor Who doing its science fiction so well together. Look, the Dalek facing off with a Victorian gentleman with a load of whatever I love all his... What is that experiment he's doing? Is that his alchemy experiment? I just put lots of things in it. But it looks great, all that ephemera. Make not idle ones. Oh. And Troughton's great because, in fact, now he's not panicking. He's very dryly assessing the situation, and you sort of know. Oh, he bites his nails though, doesn't he? And in fact, the fact that he's so deadpan about just underlying how serious it is, it's really clever. Now, if you look closely at this Dalek, its eyes aren't flashing because there's only one Dalek this week. That was an empty prop. But I remember being surprised that was the episode ending, because I'm sure I'm sure established wisdom was the episode ending was when he said, "And their greatest pleasure will be in killing me." So that's like a sort of bonus scene, but it's great. I love the way the sucker goes into the camera. Peter Hawkins is doing the Dalek voice. There we go. Roy Skelton, you pretender to the throne. Your time is in the future. That isn't that good. Oh, I love that. Just imagine if we could see it all, because that's... Anyway, I've got to remember not to talk when it stopped, because I've still got another 5 episodes to go, and I'm sure there will be gaps that need filling. So, right. What will Simon go... What have I chosen? Oh, my choice is simple. That scene, the face-off with the Doctor and the Dalek, I think that's one of the great scenes of Doctor Who. I just think everything about it is brilliant. I explained why I don't need to repeat myself. What has Simon Guerrier chosen as his best thing of episode 2?
My best thing about episode 2 is that we learn the Daleks are running this antique shop. But perhaps the Doctor was already onto them, because this antique shop stuff is set on the 20th of July 1966, the same day as the event of the Faceless Ones and of the final bit of the War Machines. And this is the thing, the War Machines begins with the first Doctor having a pricking sensation in his skin, which he gets, he says, when Daleks are near. So I think he detected the antique shop all that time ago. And I think that's rather fun. My best thing
Yes! Did he say July? I think I said June in episode 1. Oh, that's going to get the I think you will find us. I think that's not bad, considering. Anyway, I knew that. I said about that in episode 1, didn't I? But I never... And I knew that he says that in the War Machines, because he goes, I get that same feeling when the Daleks... He actually fluffs the line, which is a shame, but William Hartnell in the War Machines, says, oh yeah, I've got that prickling sensation from when the Daleks are about, which of course is just, saying that something's up and it's Wotan and he's built some not very good big boxy Dalek things. Some slightly less svelte Daleks in the post office from his base in the post office tower. But a year later, because of the accident, or just the happenstance that, episode 1 of this is on the same day as some of the War Machines, that actually retroactively makes sense of that. I would not have thought to nominate that as one of my favourite things, but it is. That's typical of Simon Guerrier. He's a really interesting... He has an interesting mind and a joy of offbeat things, and that's why I'm very pleased he did this, and I'm delighted he chose that, even though it means that I didn't choose the thing that he chose, but that doesn't matter. Love that. Good choice, Simon. You've amused me. Well, look, that's the end of the moving bits of Evil of the Daleks, but I hope you're still with me for episode 3, which will be next. It's episode 3, and the Daleks are about to embark on their dastardly plan as we freeze again and watch a reconstructed version of Evil of the Daleks. I am about to press play in 3, 2, 1, now. Excellent. So we're back to stills, which is a real shame. Isn't it interesting that episode 2, which is the episode that exists, is it the only one that hasn't got any filmed material in it? And film material is, of course, where the money is, and it's often in episode 1 to, get people hooked into the story. No, you see, they've gone Evil of the Daleks by David Whittaker episode 3, whereas the moving episode went episode 2 by David Whittaker. Now, that may have been an anomaly. Who knows? Now, I do know that this cliffhanger was refilmed because they've got an extra Dalek on set. So you would have had... Its eyes would have glowed and Gerald Taylor would have done his acting. And the thing I didn't say about the Lost in Time set of having those episodes is that, of course, when I'd collected the single episodes, which I loved doing because it was like getting a glimpse at part of one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, because you couldn't see the rest of the story. And I found that fascinating, that window into the past. But when I first started collecting, this episode did not, episode 2 of Evil of the Daleks did not exist. So when the Lost in Time set came out, I had got Evil 2 by then, and in not bad quality, but nonetheless, seeing them on Lost in Time all cleaned up, whereas when a lot of those old episodes, when you got them bootlegged, that was the only way to get them in those days, it looked like they were bad photocopies that had been slashed by Zorro, because, terrible quality. But again, that was part of it, actually seeing through the I actually think, in much the way that, the telesnaps coming back for this episode have given us sight of Arthur Terrell, for example, who we otherwise didn't have pictures of. Is that gradually bits come back and fill our knowledge. Having seen the episodes first in really bad quality, I then got an extra boost when I saw them in really good quality, and then having listened to murky soundtracks, to then see a reconstruction, at least it's a sort of dimension, it's a sort of feeling of it, and then I'm sure, well, for not this episode but other episodes, I've since then seen animated versions of or reconstructions that are have been done again and aren't on VHS but are on the DVD. So each time you see something new or something becomes clearer, and I love that. It's like when you're an archaeologist, you paint away, don't you, gradually uncovering layers. And that's a bit like being a Doctor Who fan, is that every time every time something new is discovered, our understanding increases, but our experience of it is therefore improved. I mean, there's a number of stories that I thought looked much better having seen them in really tarted up quality. I'm interested in these episodes though, because as I say, there's a long fight, but of course it was filmed at Grimsdyke House, which is the house of Gilbert O'Sullivan. I'm going to say Gilbert, I think, of Gilbert and Sullivan. I always nearly say Gilbert O'Sullivan. There is a pop star called Gilbert O'Sullivan, sang a song called Matrimony. He's still about. But it always confused me as a kid, because people would talk about Gilbert and Sullivan and Gilbert O'Sullivan, and Gilbert O'Sullivan isn't really called Gilbert O'Sullivan, so he's obviously named himself to go, I will be reminiscent of Gilbert and Sullivan, who wrote HMS Pinafore and all the other things. There's a great thing on this recon using actual shots from the house and a practical Dalek prop to sort of ape what we would have seen, and from the evidence of the telesnaps, they're not entirely inaccurate. They've gone into a lot of detail, and actually I think we sort of lose that in our assessment of Evil of the Daleks is how effective this house will have been, because filming's a big deal in Doctor Who, and you wouldn't go to film at a location unless it was really going to enhance the production. If we think about a lot of the location filming in Doctor Who, that's what this house was, but it was making use of a big beautiful house. And because we don't have any of that in episode 2, I think that would be something that when it comes back would give it a real extra dimension. But I'm still thinking about Gilbert O'Sullivan. Did you think, I could call myself Roger O'Hammerstein. Gilbert O'Sullivan. Anyway, so I've been to Grimsdyke House. There's a very posh restaurant there. I was taken by Steve Roberts from the restoration team, actually, of whom it's a favourite haunt, and said, "Should we go to Maxtable's house?" And there was a few Doctor Who fans there. It was an evening where a few and my life prior to my one-man show, Moss Ate My Doctor Who Scarf, was I didn't really hang around with Doctor Who fans at all. I was part of fandom very briefly. before I went to university, but only for a short time. But I've never really, not really part of organised fandom. It was unusual for me to have Doctor Who fan friends, apart from brief periods. So suddenly in later life to be going to Maxtable's house with, people whose names I'd read on the internet, Steve Roberts among them, who's since become a friend. It's a very interesting later chapter in my life, having not had that early thing of being I discovered Doctor Who was very much a lone pursuit. I lived in the countryside in the middle of nowhere, and I got holds of loads of old Doctor Who magazines, courtesy of a friend of a friend. He was the one Doctor Who fan I knew, but he lived in Wolverhampton, which was miles away, but he kindly lent me all of his own old Doctor Who magazines, which was a real education. So again, I pieced together my Doctor Who knowledge, and I soaked it up, and I wasn't one for outsides. So I was inside, I would go, why don't you go outside and get some fresh air? Why would I do that? I've got dusty old Doctor Who magazine. Oh, Kemmel, Sonny Caldinez, bending a metal bar to prove his strength. That would have been just a nifty, simple thing to do, but that would be impressive. And he's got, from that shot, his muscles are great. Now, a friend of mine told me that Sonny Caldinez, Kemmel, if it wasn't the all-in wrestling, because Sonny Caldinez was a wrestler, once actually did wrestle as Kemmel, because wrestlers they assume sort of characters, and I don't know if he borrowed his costume or whether he did an approximation of his costume, but I'm sure I've not verified this, but he's a friend I trust. He wrestled as the mighty Kemmel or whatever. So is that the first time a Doctor Who character has then got a life outside of Doctor Who in another medium? So the mighty Kemmel has done if not the all-in wrestling. We used to watch the wrestling on a Saturday afternoon like a religion. I remember it was it was like finding out about Santa Claus when somebody told me it was all fixed. For those of you not in the UK, wrestling, because you have the WWF and all of that. Ours wasn't quite as glamorous or as hammy. Well, it was quite hammy. So, yes, Kemmel. Oh, well, Sonny Caldinez, of course, has a great history with Doctor Who, because he comes back as various Ice Warriors. And of course, it's only when I did this as a book I did with Rob Shearman called Running Through Corridors that it became apparent that 2 stories in a row there's a strong, silent black man, which is a sort of cliche, and I think those predisposed so to do would see it as an example of backwards thinking, but they're both actually good and benign characters, and there's no point yelling at history for living within the mores of its own era. I think there's nothing to be achieved from that, and I know from interviewing actors, and I've spoken to an academic that interviewed a lot of black actors from the 50s and 60s who said they were they were treated very well. And although, gosh, in Quater, I found some paperwork for Quatermass in the Pit, and there's a black actor in episode 1, Lionel Ngakane, who went on to be a great man of the theatre in South Africa, but was based in the UK. He was South African, based in the UK. And on the paperwork, it says, in the dressing room allocation, he has a separate dressing room, and it says, note, and it uses the word coloured, which you wouldn't use, it became out of date very quickly. Coloured actor, give own dressing room or something like that. And you go, is that just... Well, that's for various reasons, but it's quite sobering when you read that. And, and I talked to a modern TV producer friend of mine. I mentioned it, and she went, well, that's the producer's fault. The producer's out of order. And I went, the producer was a Jew, an Austrian Jew escaped from Hitler. So I think things are a bit more complicated than that. And I think there's a tendency to yell at history to make ourselves look good, which I think is fruitless. And it's a non-spendable currency. And in fact, Mario Scoring, interestingly, was described to me once by a fellow actor as right of Genghis, and he lost a lot of money because he was high up in equity, and he took equity to court a couple of times. But I remember he did lose a lot of money because he took equity to court about selling programs to South Africa, apartheid South Africa, and that was interesting because as a kid, I mean, we didn't have Jaffa oranges in our house because the apartheid regime was, a terrible thing, and we would not support it as a household via the medium of shopping. That's what you did in those days, and so Equity were of a similar view. They didn't deal with apartheid South Africa. It would be seen to be supporting the regime if you sold British television programs featuring actors from British Equity to South Africa. Whereas Goring was of the opinion that politics shouldn't get in the way of Equity members making money through foreign sales, which is a position to take that is it's easy to go, oh well, then he was a racist. Well, or he just thought, or he was a pragmatist. I don't know. I don't agree with him, but I'm also not quick to throw around the epithet racist. And also, his wife Lucy Mannerheim was again a German Jew who'd escaped from Hitler. So people are complicated. But yes, poor old Marius. He and one of the people who spoke very much against him was a black actor from Doctor Who, Louis Mahoney, who, as I record this, died not that long ago. And I remember reading about it at the time, thinking of Ponty from Planet of Evil and Theodore Maxtable arguing with each other, and it gave it a whole Doctor Who frisson for me. I actually met Marius Goring. He was in a production of what was it called? A play. Wasn't Dangerous Corner, but it was something like that. And Agatha Christie with Michael Cashman off of Time Flight and EastEnders, and now The House of Lords, and Marius Goring and Glyn Edwards, Dave from Minder, who was never in Doctor Who and should have been a good actor. And I met Marius Goring. He had a little dog, and I had a crap biro. So I have Marius Goring's autograph in one of my Doctor Who books in knackered biro. And it was before the days of, I didn't have a camera, so I couldn't get a snap or anything. But I met Marius Goring very briefly. I've never met Jo Rowbottom. She is the mother of a friend of mine, and he did try to get me an interview, but apparently she's not keen to talk about her acting career, which went on for, a lot of actresses dropped off the radar quite early, but she was in a sitcom, Romany Jones, which with James Beck, who was thought of for Toby. Interesting. And was appearing in stuff, well after I knew that she was in Doctor Who. I'd see her pop up in things like The Bill and stuff. And she has got a lovely quality, but some people just don't want to talk about their careers, which is totally understandable. It's a shame because I always think of them as the ones that got away, especially if they're known to somebody. But of course, we think that people's memories of 4 weeks or whatever spent doing a Doctor Who, well, that's precious information. Well, I mean, if you ask me what I did in March 1992, I would have no idea. Yeah, but what about those people you knew then? Well, yeah, maybe vaguely. But I'd still like to chat to Jo Rowbottom because I think Molly Dawson's lovely. She's a great character, and she's great companion material because she's quite feisty. She's this is a great scene. Doctor being mean to Jamie. I remember there was Doctor Who magazine, after they were sort of running out of things to do in Doctor Who archives, they did a series called Nostalgia. It was another way of packaging, looking at a story. But I remember they talked... Nobody talks about nostalgia anymore. Nostalgia ain't what it used to be. I thought it was called Nostalgia. This is great. And we know and love Frazer Hines because he's very funny. and he's always game to give a scene a bit of extra comic energy, and his rapport with Troughton, his comic rapport with Troughton is gold. But he's great in this. And he's, this is, we've only just lost Ben and Polly, and this is, them suddenly exploiting this great dynamic they have between these two men. And Frazer Hines rises to the occasion. And the Doctor is at his most sort of manipulative and Machiavellian. And again, it seems like we're in part of an epic. Companions and Doctors, having a big schism doesn't happen that often. And look at, even that shot of the Doctor pointing, I don't know if that's from that scene, but that's a great telesnap. Yeah, I'm sick to death. This is Jamie's pretty fiercely crossed. That is a fantastic scene, and again, it really feels like you're getting to the guts of the show. But of course, the Doctor is manipulating him. That's what's really interesting, because Troughton is such a sort of joyful pixie. He scampers about and he capers like a child, and he's got that sort of innocent glint that he has. But underneath it all is a guy who contemplates terrible things, and you can tell he's seen terrible things. It's a terribly multi-layered performance, and we never quite let the if we don't want to, we don't actually quite need to let the Doctor off the hook for how he behaves in this episode, because he is manipulative. Windsor Davis and Gary Watson as Arthur Terrell. Gary Watson is another actor he's not turned me down. I got his email address. He lives in my hometown, which I discovered when I was doing a play, and another actor in the play was, instead of staying in a local hotel, he was staying with his friend, Gary Watson. I said, I didn't know Gary Watson lived here. And he said, "Oh yeah, because he's retired now because he did all those voiceovers. Because Gary Watson was a brilliant voiceover man. In fact, I was told a story that he, because a friend of mine has interviewed him for his Zcast thing. So he agreed. That's what really upsets me, when somebody agrees to do an interview for somebody else, and then my friend gave me his email address and I emailed him, went, and you live not far from my mum. I'd love to come and nothing." So it's like, so it's not that you won't be interviewed, you just won't be interviewed by me. That's happened with a few people. I could never get a letter back from Norman Jones, who played Creasong in The Abominable Snowmen, and he's in Doctor Who and the Silurians, and he's in The Mask of Mandragora. And I was like, well, he's obviously one of those actors that just doesn't reply to people. And I tried a couple of different attempts and a couple of different angles, and then somebody else I know, he got a really chatty reply from. I was like, what did I do wrong? But anyway, Gary Watson is alive and well and living not far from my mum. But he basically retired because he did all the voiceovers for the adverts. A really good service, and it was in those days where you could earn a lot of money from voiceovers because you got paid properly and you got proper repeats. I think this is the only episode that has an exterior shot of the house, which I've just seen. And they did do an exterior, and I think this is the only one you see it in. And apparently Gary Watson's agent just rang him one day and said, look, Gary, you've got so much money coming in from your voiceover royalties, you can just stop if you want. And so he retired to a lovely market town, and I hope he's very happy. But I hope also will at some point consider chatting to a local lad about Doctor Who. He's another one that got away. And he's not... And it's just, there aren't many actors of that period called Gary. It's one you sort of associate with, 80s kind of earthy actors. But I think he's posh. I think he's called Garraway or something, and so he's shortened Gary to make himself seem less posh, which seems odd because your instinct is to think that actors will flower up their names. Although actually, there's an actor called Norman Hartley who's in The Invasion and The Time Meddler, who was, I think, Norman Greatorex or something. He had a brilliant name and changed it to Hartley. I think there was a period in the 60s when agents said, "Don't be too posh, son. I suppose because it's the kitchen sink and all of that sort of thing, that to be seen as posh was to be seen as not genuine and not earthy enough. So actors who ran the risk of sounding a bit posh had to suddenly go, no, man, I'm called John. I'm not called Balliol. Or whatever. What's Bob short for? Rupertaville. So this is... my image of these... So a lot of these episodes is of indistinct action, but actually there's night filming here, isn't there, which is gorgeous. And again, I think we miss a lot of that because that's unusual. You don't get many. You get some nice nighttime scenes in studio, and that's very nice to light, but nighttime location filming I think would have looked quite special during this period, although there is nighttime in Macra Terror as well, isn't there? But I don't know if that's on location. So again, I think that's... Oh, so yes, Windsor Davis gets killed. Oh, but I think he's back next week as a corpse. So I think I talked about that in the last episode about actors. Yeah, Kennedy came back as a corpse. Windsor Davis comes back as a corpse. If you get killed close enough to the next episode, you get another episode fee. But yeah, I like the fact that Windsor Davis has been in Doctor Who, and he's the only person in the classic series of Doctor Who to be called Toby, and that was quite special to me because Toby is a rubbish name. I don't mind it so much now. I hated it as a kid, but I was relieved I wasn't called Tobias, because Tobias Vaughan is of course called Tobias, but I'm not. I'm just Toby. I'm shortened. I don't really approve of that. I think you should give somebody a long name, and then if they're jolly enough to have their name shortened. I don't believe in christening kids Charlie. The name is Charles. If they're jolly enough, people will call them Charlie, but you have to earn that. But I was quite glad I was not called Tobias. I don't know how I feel about that now. Anyway, yeah, this is all nice and dark and on film, and they'll have made good use of the house. And I suspect Derek Martinez will have shot it well, because he makes a virtue of... even in Galaxy 4, when that came back, and it's... there's some scenes that are potential to be quite dull. The way he frames all of his... And in Galaxy 4, he's basically got 4 women that look the same, but the way he keeps them in the picture and keeps the picture interesting. So with the freedom that film allows him, I think this could have looked quite special in a way that we probably don't appreciate. And this fight scene that is largely indecipherable to us from this vantage point... I'm as I'm watching this is only occurring to me now. I'm confident will have been quite good. Oh, and that's the episode ending. So yeah, Kemmel there to confront Jamie. Although I've got a feeling isn't the fight part of next week's episode ending as well? I can't remember. As I say, my feeling about these next installments is that they're a bit of a lull, so I hope that I am proved wrong, because I'm enjoying this. I'm certainly things are occurring to me that might not have done as I'm trying to sort of piece the pictures together. I like that. Very good. I hope you're enjoying Evil of the Daleks. I now have to choose something from this episode. The night. I do like that night filming, that darkness. I think that looks really impressive. But I also like the argument between... That's a classic scene, isn't it? The argument... No, I'd be naff to choose night filming, wouldn't it? I think there's night filming next week as well, so I could choose the night filming next week. No, what's night... No, I'm going to choose that scene between Jamie and the Doctor, because I haven't mentioned Frazer Hines and Patrick Troughton enough, because I just take for granted that they're brilliant, but also because Frazer is so often the jolly comic stooge, although he does the action stuff very well. But I think that's a more meaty scene for him that he doesn't get as many of. So for that, it's a real standout scene. What has Simon Guerrier chosen? He's probably chosen something to do with the fact that he's probably chosen something clever. He's weaved a web, no doubt.
My best thing about episode 3 of the Evil of the Daleks is the argument between Jamie and the Doctor. I actually think this is a mirror scene to the celebrated bit in Tomb of the Cybermen episode 3, where the Doctor talks about his past with Victoria. In both that and this, we're getting an insight into who the Doctor really is, a more devious, darker character, affected by stuff in his past, a kind of shade to him that we haven't had before. There's an interview with producer Innes Lloyd from about this time saying that they started Troughton too silly but are trying to redress that in the programme. And I think Troughton and Frazer Hines really go for it in this scene. I think it's great.
Yes. Yes! I got it! I got the same as Simon. And it's an amazing scene. And it's weird because the thing about the Troughton being devious and a bit of a is he pulling people's strings? They're never particularly overt with it, but it's definitely there. Great stuff. Well, let's go back in time through the medium of static electricity and watch episode 4 of Evil of the Daleks, and I'm going to press play in 3, 2, 1. Let's see, which makes no difference because you'll be on a different machine and in a different medium for me, and still it's starting now. I do like these titles, by the way. Later Doctor Who titles are great. Many a great title sequence in Doctor Who. But I love the sheer abstraction of the Bernard Lodge stuff. It's a suggestion of time and space without it. The idea that it's literal, and then the Doctor's face comes on and is torn to pieces, which is whoa. And then the font is quite sort of. It's very Evil of the Daleks, actually. The font is. It's like it's just on the front of a book cover. So you've got sort of it's like having an ancient book. Sort of projected, the writing on the cover of an ancient book projected onto the sort of the billowing movement of space and time. Love it. Now we've no idea what this is like. Peter Diamond is the fighter ranger who knew what he was doing, an excellent stuntman who did work on the Star Wars movies. I think he did the fight for The Princess Bride, which is, you've not seen the sword fight in The Princess Bride, is one of the greatest movie sword fights of all time. Witty, really well done. It's got character in it as well as action. It's brilliant. If you've not seen The Princess Bride, I don't know what you're doing here. Go and see The Princess Bride where you watch me talking along to still pictures. But Doctor Who's history is littered with fairly bad fights as well. I'm looking at you, the time meddler. But I trust Derek Martinez and I trust Peter Butterworth, Peter Diamond. I also trust Sonny Caldenez because he was a wrestler, of course. So, again, it's very difficult. That's why I think, that's partially the reason I'm sort of a bit muddy about the middle episodes of Evil, which are very important, of course, because Jamie is basically being a guinea pig doctor to distill the human factor, whatever that is. I like it is a bit David Whittaker. That wasn't. I think there was going to be in the original story. They go back in time and get a caveman called Og, which because they needed somebody to do stuff to distill essence de humanité, or whatever it is. Oh yeah, there's some outside filming of Kemmel hanging down the roof. So yeah, Og would have been the key to the human factor, whatever that is. They're very vague about it because it's a very vague sort of idea. There's one thing that makes us human. What is it? It's a factor. It's a thing. And can you narrow it down with that? Well, it's not the thing that makes the Daleks. What's that? That's a different sort of factor. Gonna go into any more detail? Don't need to, because I'm gonna make it a really good production with really interesting characters and a big Dalek fight at the end. So you'll sort of forget about that bit. Oh, okay. And I sort of do, because that and the idea of alchemy, the idea that Maxtable is after alchemy, and David Whittaker's absolute faith in Mercury as being something that can do almost anything. It makes his approach to science a particularly very much his own thing, but I don't mind it because he's an interesting writer, David Whittaker. He pushes different buttons, and I think that's what the Discontinuity Guide meant, perhaps, by what is it, papering over its scientific implausibility with a confident swagger. Yeah, it's a brilliant period production with a gloriously interesting guest character. So therefore the science we can forget about. Now we've just seen Victoria's handkerchief on the floor, which is the birth of many a great anecdote from Frazer Hines about picking up things of Victoria's that have been dropped and picking up and replacing the prop with a pair of knickers, much to the embarrassment of Deborah Watling. I think there's a similar, that anecdote, one size fits all. It can also fit something that happened in the Web of Fear as well. And again, aren't those much loved anecdotes part of our experience and the appeal of the show? Oh, Kemel's got a fez. Long before in Doctor Who land, fezzes were cool. It's not the only fez in classic Doctor Who. Ibrahim Namin has one in Pyramids of Mars. I'm not going to list all the fezzes in Doctor Who. I don't know them. But there's those two. Now, interesting. Patrick Troughton is not here this week. I think this is the first week he has off since he started. That was really interesting when I did my book with Rob Shimon, Running Through Corridors, and we watched the series in order, a couple of episodes a day. Hartnell has quite a lot of time off, various weeks off. Troughton is worked into the ground, and he's off this week. Is the next episode he has off Web of Fear 2? I think it might be. And then he has one off in Wheel in Space, has one off in Seeds of Death, has the filming off The Dominators, but he doesn't get that much time off. And certainly in this first year of his, worked into the ground. But in this episode, he's in the episode, but he has to do some pre-filming. So Troughton and the Dalek, those scenes will have looked extra swanky because they'll have been shot on film. But I don't think Deborah Watling's there either, is she? Is she all on film this week? So Frazer Hines was king of the studio this week. I wonder who got dressing room number 1. So yes, there's Windsor Davis back as a corpse for 1 week only. Fee's a fee. Oh. And of course the character dynamics, and the whole, he's very wild-eyed, isn't he? Marius Goring, you sense he's enjoying the fact that he gets to be. He gets to indulge himself as a performer, gets to give a vivid performance. I remember when I interviewed Clive Merrison, who's in Tomb of the Cybermen, the story after this, but who is a wonderful actor, and I think an actor of great colour and character. But he said to me, I am rather a vivid actor, and I like that because I think OTT sounds disparaging and is wrong. Actually, I like performances with a bit of heft, and I think vivid is a great description. So yes, Marius Goring is vivid, and John Bailey is vivid in a different way. Of course, because and the character dynamics are great here because you've got Maxtable's, he's prepared to kill his friend. You know, the manipulation that Maxtable does with Waterfield, that we go, well, he's bad, but the Doctor's manipulating Jamie, but for good. Do the ends justify the means? We know what sort of people say that. It's really interesting character dynamics. There's a lot going on amongst the long scenes between Kemmel and Jamie, which are, of course, again, do not benefit from the fact that we cannot see them because Kemmel doesn't speak. I've got a lovely picture because Sonny did the Ice Warriors commentary. I've got a great picture taken by my friend Simon Harries of Deborah Watling, who's small, Frazer Hines, who's a bit bigger, and then Sonny, who's really tall, and they're all hugging each other. I think Sonny's that way on, and then Frazer's there, and then Debbie's behind, and it's great, and it's this sort of, it's like a lovable version of that John Cleese, Ronnie Barker, Ronnie Corbett sketch, but they're all hugging each other. Are those Victoria Waterfield's knickers? I think I interrupted myself on a train of thought. I'm sorry about that. It's very difficult because I have to follow this and talk at the same time. It's the way it works. But it wouldn't make for much of a podcast if you're just listening if I didn't say anything. So Jamie is talking to Kemmel because yes, they're trying to find the human factor. That's what I was talking about. The dynamics between the characters here. You've got this sort of extended family. You've got Waterfield and his mate Maxtable, his manipulative friend, his manipulative rich friend Maxtable, who lives at Grimsdyke House, and then Ruth and Terrell and Molly, who if this was a shorter story, if this was a story being told today, I think you'd still have those characters. I think we sometimes knock modern or modern telly by going, well, the reason these stories, because they've got 7 episodes in which to tell the story, means that you can get interesting supplementary characters. I think in modern Who you get characters who are in one scene who can move you, or Russell T Davies was particularly good at that, or can give you backstory. I think there's more economy of storytelling. But that's partially to do with technology. These were mounted in a very different way, and I love this. So I'm not being disparaging of either. I think you can love both. Again, things are complicated, and liking one thing doesn't mean you dislike another. And I think the characters of Terrell and Ruth and lovely Molly Dawson are good additions. Like the Terrell subplot is a really interesting one. It doesn't really. The story could do without it, but he's an interesting character, and actually, for when this story moves on, as it does in a couple of episodes' time, I think the fact that you've got to know these supplementary characters so well, and you know they're with us for, you know, we meet Molly and Ruth in episode 2, and we see them for the last time in episode 6, so they're with us for a month or so. Which is a whole story for some characters in 4-parters. It feels like we're moving because we leave them behind. It's like, oh God, the story, another chapter is opening up, and it gives it this sort of feeling of an epic. It also felt like an epic because I remember Patrick Troughton in interviews, sometimes said, oh, they should, we could, if we did a film, we could remake Evil of the Daleks. I'm sure that was something he bandied about. So it was oh God, if that's the one Patrick Troughton really loves, it must be an amazing one. And it does feel like something special. And it's nice that Kemmel and Jamie have lots of sort of adventuring to do together. Jamie's a very friendly fellow, isn't he? Frazer Hines is great. He's a great ambassador for Doctor Who. He's old-fashioned Frazer Hines in that he's all about sort of giving value to the viewer. He's always he's always trying to, and that's in his approach to to how he approaches doing, conventions and commentaries and documentaries and stuff like that. But I think as an actor, he's like that as well. He's never lazy. He's always trying to keep things interesting without mugging. He's not a selfish actor, I don't think. I've got a lot of time for Jamie. He's one of the great companions, and isn't it amazing to think that he's in every Troughton story bar the first one. But of course, because this is season 4, we have no complete stories from season 4. Isn't that an absolute tragedy? I mean, isn't it weird that the 10th planet's missing its last episode? Don't trot out the Blue Peter thing. That's not true. But because it was season 5 was the big loss when I was younger. I mean, I think there were only 1, 2, 4, 5 episodes from season 5, I think. No, because they didn't have both the Wheel in Space ones. 4 episodes from season 5, I think, when I was a time tot. So we actually had more from season 4 because we got most of the 10th Planet, a couple of episodes of the Moon Base. We've got 1 episode of the Faceless Ones, then we've got 1 episode of the Underwater Menace. So we only marginally got more of season 4, but we did have more of season 4. There's a bit of footage from the house in this recon, and it's that balcony looks great, and I suspect again Martinez would have made good use of it as a set. But yeah, it's weird to think, isn't it, that this first year of Troughton's we've got, I mean, there's barely any of it. I feel that loss, I really do. I would love to see this. I would get more excited by the idea of a miss. It's what I fantasize about. I don't fantasize about wealth, and I sometimes fantasize about a loft conversion. Because I'm getting on a bit now. But I do. I sometimes, if I'm walking the dog, I go, okay, Toby, so you go to a car boot sale and you've got 6 episodes. You find 6 missing episodes, Doctor Who. Which ones do you want them to be? And I think I'd definitely choose episode 7 of this. You've got to see the Dalek Civil War. I mean, and they repeated this, of course. This was repeated after the Wheel in Space and repeated as part of the storyline. The Doctor shows... I love the fact he even goes, I'm going to weave it into a complete story for you because that's my life. I spend my life being in stories. Yes, this is... Shall I tell you the story of my holiday? But so it was weaved into the continuity, and they refer to it at the beginning of the Dominators as well. So that break in transmission, they repeated Evil of the Daleks because it's a brilliant story. So they knew it was good enough to repeat, and I think they destroyed it not long after it was repeated. I think, well, we've done it twice. That'll do. Molly Dawson. Yeah, so Molly's doing a bit of detective work herself. Yeah, give Molly a spin-off. Yeah, I'd forgotten about the fact that the repeat of Evil of the Daleks was actually part of Doctor Who continuity. Yeah, there's this stuff is all... You believe all these characters. They all have a relationship. I think there's a bit of a sadness about the subplot with Terrell and poor old Ruth. Oh, who Bridget Forsyth I worked with. She's another one that got away. These 3 are all ones that got away. I worked with Bridget Forsyth. So this is seen is populated by people who I've approached by different means for an interview and failed. Every single one of them. I worked with Bridget Forsyth. She was lovely. We chatted about Doctor Who. We had a right old natter. She's a brilliant actress. She this was a radio job, and she was playing a judge, and her voice and her diction has so much authority. She's a real class act, and she lives not far from me. So that was it. She lives not far from here. She said she'd be up for an interview, but instead of, because I'm shy, I didn't go, give us your number. I said, well, I'll just drop your agent a line, and I dropped it, and that was a foolish thing to do, because I never have luck with agents, because my project, so I've got no money to pay people. I don't commercially exploit. I'm just an acquisitive geek. I just want to gather the people and the stories. So I buy them lunch, but agents don't get 10% of lunch. You don't buy somebody lunch and then send the agent half a prawn cocktail. So there's nothing in it for them. And she was filming the new Open All Hours. And he just went, she's doing that. And I went, oh, and I took it as a sort of brush off. And if I was a dogged sort of individual, I'd have perhaps pushed that, and I didn't, and I regret that now, because I had an in. So there's something about Evil of the Daleks is trying to avoid me. Oh, God. Oh, yes. Maxtable, don't have... That's a great shot of Maxtable, and again, a really hefty actor being dominated by... The Daleks are quite scary when they're small. I know I like the big modern tanky Daleks, but actually there's sort of little squat Daleks, especially when they're they don't tower over things, but when they leer over people, again, there's a sort of malevolence about them, and of course Maxtable is a fool, this man and he's going mad. Now that's a worrying sign in a Doctor Who villain, especially in an actor who's enjoying himself. But I'd forgotten Maxtable's a bit of an idiot, because he wants the secret of alchemy. Come on, mate. And he misjudges the Daleks, doesn't he? Doesn't he say they're my colleagues? No, mate. Although I'm always wary of villains double-crossing villains as well, because I think it lets your hero off the hook. I always used to get annoyed in 24 when they'd get a new actor in to play the next level of baddie. So the previous baddie that you'd invested in and quite liked, who's also played by a good actor, would then get killed by that baddie. And you go, oh, that's just... So the hero hasn't even been responsible for the dispatching of the last threat. I always find it a little boring when the baddies sort of dispose of each other. I'm not saying that's happening here, but there is that in the dynamic of Maxtable isn't necessarily going to be defeated by the Doctor, although he is outwitted by the Doctor, but he's also partially defeated by the Daleks. Although actually, I'm talking myself out of this, because he's actually defeated by his own arrogance, because he thinks, because he's a man of property and he's a man of money and status, he can make a deal with the devil, which is a story as old as time, and his folly is that ambition and arrogance. This is nice. This is a nice scene for Bridget Forsyth, isn't it? That she, again, as a pretty supporting character. Oh, Mad Eyes. Yes, well, we all know. I love the Underwater Menace when the Doctor diagnoses Professor Zaroff as being mad. How? I looked at his eyes. He's got mad, starey eyes. So that was as psychological as you got in the 1960s. I think he's mad, so he's a bit starey. But that father-daughter stuff is nice. It's nice extra texture, and Bridget Forsyth is very good. And gets a decent crack of in those days. Most parts were worth turning up for. Even Bob Hall in episode 1, he gets a decent amount to do. And Kennedy, actors in those days, even playing sort of relatively supporting parts, you got a decent crack of the whip. We've got no idea what this is like, have we? But Kemmel and Jamie fighting the Dalek, and I believe, isn't there a scene in this? This is what I learned from that brilliant website. There's a high camera shot filming down, so you see that's what the split level of the location will have afforded a good director like Martinez and the film. So although this I think is totally mysterious to us, I'm optimistic it will have looked good. But I think there's they kill a Dalek, don't they? They blow up a Dalek. Does it get pushed off? Does it fall down a level? And this website of Gavin Reimels that I told you about on a previous episode points out that the prop that they use to be the broken Dalek is the bashed-in Dalek that's at the end of Power of the Daleks, because they'd got a broken Dalek. They were, well, that might come in useful some other time, and lo and behold, it does. And Gavin has sort of managed to compare the two and go, yes, you can tell that it's the same thing. I love that sort of scholarship in an area that isn't my area. I'm props and costumes and things aren't my speciality, but there's just been a design special from Doctor Who magazine where Phil Newman, who's another sort of dogged Doctor Who researcher, his thing is sets, and he contacted all the designers, and we've only got interviews with them because of Phil's work in the early days, and I love all that, and how people sort of share their spoils, and for me, I mean, contacts as well. Phil has always, if I've needed a number, always given me a number, because I think we're all we're all on the same side, but we don't all hang about together. There's not a sort of cabal of Doctor Who fans who meet in secret and plot, but there is a sharing of information and helpfulness. That's great. The music there again, the Dalek. So okay, well, I mean, yeah, we got through that. I was having to do a lot of guessing and a lot of talking. I'm so sorry, but that's because there was a lot of action in that, which may well have made it one of the most exciting episodes of Doctor Who ever. It's difficult to tell when you've only got pictures. So what am I going to choose? I might have to design. Chris Thompson, the designer, is Dalek Stories created by Terry Nation. I remember that Terry Nation was cross because he's not credited on episode 1. So I think there's a voiceover on episode 2. The announcer did a voiceover on episode 2, having him not been credited on episode 1, and then he's credited on episodes 3 onwards as Daleks created by. I think if he wasn't cross, his agent was. That's what agents are for. So that's why he gets a credit. But Chris Thompson, the designer, who worked as a design assistant on some of the Hartnells, is he on design assistant on Mission to the Unknown? I think, I don't know. Don't write in, but he's certainly a design assistant on. So, and this is his only credit on Doctor Who, and I think the design work on Evil is great. So because I'm tired and because there was not a lot to get to grips with, a lot of that is guesswork. So I'm going to say, for points overall, Chris Thompson's design work is glorious. He's great at the period stuff. That stuff in the futuristic stuff also holds its own and gets particularly good, I think, with the Dalek City and all of that sort of stuff. So I think for honours shared across the story, Chris Thompson's design work is going to be my favourite thing for episode 4. What has Simon chosen?
My best thing about episode 4 is there's a huge chunk of this episode where we have no idea or very little idea about what is actually going on. The fight scene at the start of the episode lasts just over 4 minutes with barely a single line of dialogue. The camera script hardly tells us anything of what's going on. The telesnaps just give us a few clues. Reminiscences of the actors in it and the crew who worked on it don't really talk us through the beats of the fight scene. So it's reconstructed in the audio versions and the audio books and whatever, really from guesswork, and I find that fascinating and quite fun. My best thing.
Right, so the thing I was complaining about, I said he was clever. The thing I was complaining about, the fact that we can't really see it, he's made into a virtue, and he's quite right. That is part of the fun of it, the guesswork, the fact that we might one day get a clue or a clip might turn up, or but it means there's still something tantalizing, something to discover. Well done for turning that into a virtue, Simon. He's a clever fella. I still make no. It is slightly cheated because so much of that was actually at the house. It's not really a very Chris Thompson-y episode, but I played the design Joker. I don't care. I don't think as outside the box as Simon. Great. Right, well, welcome back, listeners and viewers, depending on which you are. If you're a viewer, you've noticed I've raised the camera a bit to so that the camera's looking down on me like a squat, malevolent Dalek. Listeners, you'll just have to imagine that. You can just see slightly more of the top of my head, my balding head. So we're going to watch episode 5 of Evil of the Daleks. Still plenty left in this story. So press play now. Interesting, I chose for episode 4 my favourite thing. I cheated a little bit. I do feel a bit bad about that. It will probably bug me forever. Chris Thompson, the designer. Of course, I had a chance to interview him, but he lives miles away from where I am. And I was a bit busy and a bit tired. And so I didn't do it. So my friends Phil Newman and John Kelly did, but they invited me along. Phil's a better interviewer for a designer anyway. I'm pretty good with actors. I could go, what was it like working with Moultrie Kelsall in the Anglian-Shanklin Empire in 1947 or whatever? Whereas with sets, it's just like, what? So what? How did you do that wallpaper? So Phil is a professional designer. But I had a chance to interview the fantastic designer of this story, his only credit on Doctor Who, and I didn't. So as well as half of the cast that got away, the designers also got away from me as well. I have interviewed Roger Bunce, who's one of the studio cameramen from this, and Tim Coombe, who's the assistant. Ah, yes, that's the bit with the Dalek casing from Power of the Daleks that I mentioned last week. You can see it in the telesnap. How funny. Ha 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 ha. And I wonder, that would have been a nice moment with the Dalek falling off the balcony. And I think, did they have to make a special slim Dalek in order to fit through to get onto the balcony? There's lots of interesting Dalek facts. Again, like Phil is better equipped to talk about sets. Gavin Rymel is much better equipped to tell you everything you need to know about the Daleks. Check out his website. He's not sponsored me. I've mentioned him loads of times, but I do like his work. I like the scholarship and industry that goes into the piecing the history of Doctor Who together. Deborah Watling, I always think of as my sort of Doctor Who twin, because I was delighted there was an interview with her in Doctor Who magazine, and it opened saying Deborah Watling was born in Loughton in Essex, which is spelled Loughton. Well, I spent my childhood, and my family still live in the same house in Loughton, spelt Loughton, in Shropshire. And she was born on the 2nd of January 1948. I was born on the 2nd of January 1974. So Deborah Watling is my Doctor Who twin, and nobody's born on the 2nd of January. It's a terrible birthday. I think David Bailey, the photographer, maybe. Tia Carrere from Wayne's World. But no, most people don't even bother to get out of bed on the 2nd of January. It's the worst birthday in the history of time. Everyone waits till the next day or gets it out the way the day before. Troughton's very cunning here with Arthur Terrell, isn't he? And oh yes, there's swords on the wall there. I think there's a sword for. Oh no, because there's, of course, isn't it? He's magnetic. I can't remember the details. I'm talking through it. I'm sure. Doesn't he hold a sword and something magnetizes to it, and that shows that he's all Dalek-y. He's been Dalekerized because he's a magnetic man. That's quite David Whittaker science, which I rather like. Oh, and he doesn't eat or drink anything. He doesn't eat or drink anything, and he's magnetic, so he's under the thrall of the Daleks, which means he has a terrible time of it this episode, bless him. Which is cause, and that has repercussions for Ruth and for him, and you know he's going to suffer after this. He's going to convalesce as a result of what he's been through in this story, and I think that gives it a scope and a life outside these particular adventures, you know. 5 episodes in, and John Bailey, here he is as Edward Waterfield, the saddest man in Doctor Who. Hang on, I'm a professor. I'm not a student of human nature. I'm a professor of a far wider academy, of which human nature is only a part. That was in the book Doctor Who. I will come back to John Bailey, don't worry. Doctor Who, A Celebration, which is the moment, or which is the gift that I was given that I think transformed me from a kid who liked Doctor Who into a Doctor Who fan. It was so packed full of really interesting things, and I remember the family sort of passing it around at Christmas going, oh, it started the day after John F. Kennedy died. Oh, do you know he's never actually been called Doctor Who? Blah, 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 blah. Although even that does a little footnote saying, apart from the War Machines. Poor old Arthur Terrell's got the Dalek voice in his head. I love that. Yeah, it's really nice. That's a character going through the ringer. But Doctor Who, A Celebration, had colour pictures in the middle, and it had one of each Doctor up to that point with a quote. So William Hartnell, it was a picture of him, and the quote was, "I'm a citizen of the universe and a gentleman to boot." With Troughton, it was that one from Evil. I think for Pertwee, it was from Day of the Daleks. Sea Devils going. Was it the Sea Devils? I remember saying to old Napoleon, Boney, I said, although I read that as, I remember saying to old Napoleon Boney, I said, and of course it doesn't because I misinterpreted what the speech marks were. Tom Baker, did he have I'm a Time Lord, I Walk in Eternity? I think so, a picture of him surrounded by sort of refracting light and a sort of kaleidoscopic light. And Davison on the floor with broken bits around him. And I think his quote was, even a broken clock tells the right time twice a day, which I don't think is one of his lines, is it? Maybe it is. But those were the quotes under each Doctor in the middle of Doctor Who, A Celebration. So I'm not a student of human nature. I'm a professor of a far wider academy, which human nature is only a part. Didn't really know what that meant. This was 1983, so I was 9. I certainly didn't know what I'm a citizen of the universe and a gentleman to boot means. I was going, what? You allowed to kick him? What does that mean? What does that... So I've spent a lot of time being baffled by words and idioms in Doctor Who that I've only then come to understand later. That's an excellent shot of Molly Dawson being hypnotised. Another story about Marius Goring here hypnotising lovely Joe Rowbottom as fabulous maid Molly Dawson is I think maybe Mark Gatiss told me this. I'm not name dropping. I met him about 4 times, but it's just to quote my sources. Somebody told a story of Marius Goring used to walk around in a 3-piece suit with a tie and a pocket square, and I think the story had came up because I like to sport a pocket square when I'm out and about, because I was delighted when I did a DVD commentary for the Android Invasion, which is an entirely audio medium, and they don't film anything on the day. And Milton Johns, the wonderful actor from The Enemy of the World, Android Invasion, Invasion of Time, turned up in a 3-piece suit with a tie and matching pocket square. And I loved that so much that I thought, I like wearing a tie. I didn't start wearing a tie till a lot later, but I used to like stuffing something into my jacket pocket just to give it a bit of flair. I didn't look quite as formal as Milton Johns, so I wasn't cosplaying as Milton Johns, but I was certainly influenced. And anyway, apparently, Marius Goring used to go around dressed in a very smart 3-piece suit with tie and pocket square, but with trainers on. Apparently exquisite very clean white trainers because, he was in his late 70s, early 80s, and, it needed comfort on the feet, and I was given a line, and I can't remember what it was, where he said something about, you look good, but you've got to also always go for comfort downstairs, sort of thing. So I love that idea that even when you have to wear trainers because you're a bit sort of gnarled and old, you still, try and have a few, a few standards. I do like a standard. Although I'm being honest with this, because I normally I try and dress, as I say, quite well when I go out. So the fact that I've let you into my house, I'm very tempted to get changed for these. But you're at my house. I'm loafing about. You're in what you're in. You see me as I am, and you're most welcome. So long as you're nice. I've just brought you around to talk about Doctor Who. I think it's nice. I record this in a time of pestilence, and I see the internet so squabbly and so divisive, even in the worlds of Doctor Who fandom. And I see a lot of Doctor Who fans getting cross with each other, and then the country at large getting cross with each other. The only way to fight the dark is to try and shine a bit of light, and the only light I have is that I'm very enthusiastic about Doctor Who, and I can talk about it. So I'm talking about it to you, and I know that some people are probably out there, twiddling thumbs. I was going to say maybe short of Doctor Who material. You're not short of Doctor Who material. There's plenty of Doctor Who podcasts. So thank you for choosing this one, or thank you for choosing to watch along. You're on my sofa, or am I on your sofa? Anyway, hello. I like this dynamic between Maxwell and Terrell. I mean, it would all go, I think, in a modern story, or it would be dealt with in a couple of scenes. But I think he's a good actor, good character. Oh, that's it. Yeah, that was the point. Christopher Benjamin was considered for Toby, I mentioned a few episodes ago. I pick a little bit of a fight with the way that Doctor Who's history is written sometimes, because they, in production files, they find sort of actors' names scrawled next to parts. And it's always written up as, for example, with this, Barry Ingham lost out to the role of Arthur Terrell to Gary Watson. I don't know that he did. Barry Ingham may well have been considered, but Barry Ingham was a big actor. Associate artist of the Royal Shakespeare Company. He's Paris in The Mythmakers. He's in the film of Doctor Who and the Daleks. He may have been considered or thought of very fleetingly for the role of Arthur Terrell. It doesn't mean they offered it to him, or it doesn't mean that they thought of him and then went, nah, not him, let's get Gary Watson. They might have offered it to him. It might not have even got to him. His agent might have gone, no way, it's not a big enough part. So when they say, so-and-so lost out to so-and-so, there are other actors considered for other parts. I think Lee Montague, fine actor, was considered for Maxtable. That doesn't mean he lost out to Maria Scoring, or that they're comparable, because I've been involved in casting of stuff. You write loads and loads of names. It doesn't mean they're in competition with each other, or one person is offered it and another isn't, or whatever. All sorts of different factors, and sometimes it's just speculation. So it's just a little hill I want to die on, in the way that sometimes, and I think it goes on because people then go on to IMDb and go, so-and-so won the part over so-and-so. Not necessarily. Some of the others may have been offered it and turned it down. I thought that was really important as I started saying it. I've tailed off a bit and realised that some of the hills I'm prepared to die on are pointless deaths, and they're only things that worry me. But it's amazing, because that's been up in my head for so many years as a thing that's slightly irritated me when I've read it. This is my chance to say it out loud, and then you go, oh, actually it doesn't really matter. But that's a lesson for life. It's because I think sometimes we bottle things up and then we get furious and we type them on the internet and we expunge our things that annoy us. And actually then when you say them out loud, it takes the power out of them and actually makes you realise that some of them aren't that important. That's what I've found anyway. Now, John Bailey I promised to come back to. In the Dennis Potter play, Vote, vote, vote for Nigel Barton. There's two. The stand-up Nigel Barton, which I think is the first one. Vote, vote, vote for Nigel Barton is the second one. And Nigel Barton is an aspiring MP played by Keith Barron. And his sort of election, what they called manager sponsor. There is a word, and I forget it now because it's 1 o'clock in the morning and I'm on my 5th episode of non-existent Doctor Who in a row. Agent? It's not just agent, is it? Anyway, whatever. His election guy is, I think, called Jack May, which is the name of an actor. It's the actor who plays General Hermack in the Space Pirates. Is he called Jack May, the character? Anyway, is played by John Bailey. And it's a very different performance to Edward Waterfield, and it's a really good performance. And he gets some great moments in it. And it's one of the he's one of the great Dennis Potter characters in a really important play. So if you want to see another side of John Bailey, check out Vote, Vote, Vote for Nigel Barton. God, I haven't seen that in years. There's so much lovely archive telly to remind oneself of. And there's good telly today. I mean, I'm not a... sometimes when I sort of talk about how these stories have time to breathe and the characters have time to do something, I'm not knocking modern telly. I think modern telly has so much that's good about it. But I have to say I am very much drawn to... Black and white is so good as well, isn't it? Black and white is so atmospheric. And I think, again, but that's partially is because there's something spooky about watching The Ancient. And it's not so much a case with this one, but a lot of old Doctor Who we watch, we're entertained by the dead. It's our archives are populated by ghosts, and I think that in a way is quite sort of spooky and profound. Seeing something that when they were doing it, they were there and alive and as present, and I could see them, feel themselves as much as I can now. And now they're gone. I find that strangely moving. I remember Matthew Waterhouse doing an interview in Doctor Who magazine and talking about how when you watched a silent film, that even that extra in the background was now dead, but to them then it was life was present and real and important. And I think there is something about it's a bit like the camera capturing the soul, isn't it? It's a bit of that. The idea that that everything here is sort of preserved forever. I mean, or not, because I'm watching a missing episode. But that was the principle. Now we've got a sword fight, which I suspect would have been all right because 1, Peter Diamond, and 2, Gary Watson was around this time, and he'd just done it. Was a musketeer. Now there's a Three Musketeers. There's a Three Musketeers that's very hooey. I remember finding it in a Radio Times from around this time. I think it's Paul Whitson-Jones as Porthos, of course. Paul Whitson-Jones from the Mutants and the Smugglers, always played slightly. Porthos is always a bit larger, isn't he? Is Jeremy Brett D'Artagnan? But I've got a... Why am I thinking of Lawrence Payne as D'Artagnan? Jeremy Brett has not done a Doctor Who, but he was touted as a Doctor Who in the 80s. People wanted him to play Doctor Who in the 80s. But it's a Doctor Who Sherlock thing going on. Gary Watson. What about... Oh, but Jeremy... Oh, hang on. No, it's Brian Blessed. What about... Brian Blessed, Gary Watson, Jeremy Young, Jeremy Brett. Jeremy Brett as D'Artagnan. And then there's an earlier one that's got Paul Whitson-Jones that has Lawrence Payne as D'Artagnan. Lawrence Payne lost his eye in a sword fight in Sexton Blake. That's Lawrence Payne from The Two Doctors and The Leisure Hive and The Gunfighters. And Roger Delgado was in that and somebody else. And that was an earlier one. But I think the 60s one is Blessed, Jeremy Young from Unearthly Child, Mission to the Unknown, Gary Watson. So he'll have been a good sort of... wonder why that's why they thought of him, because I think it was 66. I think it was around this time. Gary Watson could sword fight. Oh, and the Doctor rescues him. And there's something quite urgent about that, isn't there? Telling Ruth, get the hell out of here, because things are about to get really heavy. And yeah, it's episode 5. We ain't finishing. We've got. There's more to happen. Oh. And it's nice that Terrell gets his sort of humanity back. I wonder though if he spends his old age going, I used to be able to magnetize metal. Can't do it anymore. Yeah. So yes. Anyway, 2, 3 musketeers, 6 musketeers, 8 musketeers, because D'Artagnan's a musketeer. But yes, I remember thinking how who heavy one or both of them were when I found them in. My idea was to go to Birmingham Library, which I only did it I think twice, but it was like, because I live in the middle of nowhere, to leaf through Radio Timeses. That's when I found gold, like a cast list for production of The Three Musketeers that had some Doctor Who actors in it. That was to me that was more exciting than football. Oh dear. This is why I've ended up at 1 o'clock in the morning in the middle of plague-ridden Great Britain as the civil war looks like it's going to break out, and everyone, and the world is a pretty sad place to behold. I get my fun by absorbing myself in a Doctor Who story that the details of which are not hugely familiar, because I have to say I've watched the recons and I've listened to the soundtracks, but certainly far less often than I would watch moving pictures and episodes, and that because it's harder, and because somebody's got whoever you are, if you're watching this and you've got my CD of Evil of the Daleks, which just means that somebody... That's another example of Evil of the Daleks abandoning me. God, it'd be just my luck if I found it. I found it at car boot, so it had melted my hand. Now, this funny. I nominated the argument in the previous episode, but actually the one covered in that nostalgia article, it's this one. It's the bit where he calls him callous, and he says we're finished, doesn't he? So in fact, I think I sort of nominated the one in episode 3, which Simon did as well. So it was a serendipitous moment, because I think I'd sort of meant this one really, because he says we're finished. I mean, that's a real moment for the Doctor and his companion, especially jolly old Jamie, with whom he's just established that rapport. When you see them sort of galloping around Gatwick Airport, suddenly free of Ben and Polly, and they become this sort of double act. Yes, I forgot, of course. This is where the story, having been a sort of Victorian melodrama with those characters we just got rid of, this is where it takes a really offbeat turn. And I mean, I never played trains. Let's talk about the Daleks playing trains. I didn't really know what that was, but it's just going choo-choo. But these Daleks suddenly being weird, it's a great cliffhanger, isn't it? Because it's not the Doctor in danger. It's I think the modern parlance is WTF is going on, and this rather guff idea about human factor, Dalek factor, I forgive it because it gives us the Daleks as we've never seen them before, and the Daleks done badly can be rather boring. We all know the cliche of the cliche of the Daleks when they're used unimaginatively, but when they surprise you, I love that. The Doctor on the Dalek, and at first are they being menacing? No, they're playing a game, and they're playing a game. It's a game. I love that. Isn't that glorious? It's slightly surreal and slightly weird. that is such an unusual cliffhanger. But it's the story going, we are taking you to places we've never been before. This is the Daleks as you've never seen them before. What's going on? I adore that. I think that is so clever and weird and offbeat and strange and I think I use the word beguiling too much, but I'm beguiled by it. I'm charmed by it, but I'm slightly discombobulated and off-put by it as well. It's rather an amusing game, don't you think? And I love the fact that the cliffhanger, there's no cliffhanger like that. That is unlike anything, I think, in the whole of Doctor Who. So I've chosen my moment. It's that sequence, that cliffhanger, and maybe the playing of the trains, that cliffhanger. It's a great moment of Doctor Who. I challenge Simon to choose something better than that. Okay, slight cut there because there was a technical glitch. I haven't been cheating, I promise. So, what has Simon chosen? I defy him to have chosen something that wasn't the cliffhanger. Let's see.
The thing about episode 5 is the ending. Again, we get this argument between Jamie and the Doctor. Again, Jamie saying he can't trust the Doctor and doesn't even know who he is. And that's big, serious stuff. But it then flips because the Daleks burst in and they want to play trains. Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said the same, except I used the words offbeat and beguiling, which I overuse as much as the word verisimilitude, which I've been conscious to try and avoid using. And I've just played that joker. So I think I should maybe get fined every time I say offbeat or beguiling or robust. They seem to be my words at the moment. I shall try to eclecticize my verbal palette. So that's pretty good hit rate for me. Having had the argument in episode 3, even though I kind of partially mistook it for that argument, cliffhanger. And we've ridden out the sort of slightly choppier waters, I would say, of the middle instalments of Evil of the Daleks. We're about to go to Skaro. The Dalekanium's about to hit the fan. Not this one. Well, it might. Let's see. Next time. But for now, I hope you're enjoying this podcast. Rather an amusing little podcast, I hope.
I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
I think you'll find.
I think you'll find.
John Bailey's character in Vote, Vote, Vote for Nigel Barton is called Jack Hay, not Jack May. Close, but no cigar. And indeed, in Doctor Who: A Celebration, the quote accompanying Peter Davison is, "A broken clock keeps better time than you," and that is said to him by Tegan, so an unusual choice. Oh yeah, and the Napoleon Boney quote is of course from Day of the Daleks, a story I did about a week before recording this, so yeah, well done memory. Okay, I'm not playing this time, well, apart from the episode, so press play on Evil of the Daleks, episode 6, in 3, 2, 1. Now then, this will mean nothing to you, those of you who are listening, but those of you who are viewing may go, hang on, he's got changed, and he looks a bit older. No, I mean, hopefully I don't. And episode 7 will be back to the night that I did Evil of the Daleks. I would like to say there was a technical problem with my recording of episode 6 of Evil of the Daleks, which starts with the game of trains, which I think is brilliant. It is a rather amusing little game. Unfortunately, the commentary, when I listened back to it, was neither amusing nor informative. I have a habit, I think, and we'll watch this as a verbal tick. If I say, yeah, and that's interesting because that means I'm buying myself a bit of time to say something. And in the case of episode 6, to say something that wasn't remotely interesting at all, quite a lot. So when I was reviewing it for technical reasons, largely because I don't like listening to the sound of my own voice, although this may sound contrary to what this whole exercise is about, but my own voice to me sounds like nails on a blackboard scratching out the words, "You sound like a git." But that's one thing. But actually, I kept saying, this is really interesting, and then saying the least interesting things possible for 25 minutes. So I've done the unprecedented thing. Unprecedented, this is only the 5th story I've done of re-recording this episode. If Doctor Who has a history of re-recording things that haven't worked very well. So that's a bit of context to why, for the video, I look a bit different. The listener would be completely unaware, but you'd have been aware of the original episode 6. It was really tedious. Unlike episode 6 of Evil of the Daleks, which starts brilliantly. And I love this, and I've talked through it, and it's a shame. But hopefully that giving you that context was important. And we can catch up now, because this is the Daleks playing trains. This is an absolutely brilliant idea. These Alpha, Beta, Omega. Well, one, it gives us a brilliant anecdote from Roy Skelton that he often trotted out, which was when he was Beta, he had a line to say something like, "Alpha, what is happening?" or some such. And instead he said, "What's it all about, Alpha?" Which apparently made some people laugh and some people cross. But depending on how he was framing the anecdote. But it's a great story and a good line and a good gag. The idea that the Daleks, who have been played by school kids in the playground, generations of school kids in the playground, the idea of giving that to the Daleks to do is a wonderful, grotesque parody of the influence that they had on children, and now the very children that they have influenced dictate the way that these humanized, infantilized Daleks speak, which I think is really creepy. It's a really interesting idea. Apparently Terry Nation didn't like the idea at all. He saw them as cold, purely evil creatures of menace. But a great way to make that really spooky and really creepy is to upend it. It's to turn it on its head. The gas mask child is another, a sort of, a parody of childhood. Is a terrifying thing because we equate childhood with innocence, and we equate the Daleks with, cold extermination. So to hear them speaking in that childish way is quite charming, but then when you think about it, it's very unnerving. And I like Terry Nation. I like his sort of comic strippy sort of approach to writing that he does, and he does sort of these great epic space adventure type things. But I think David Whittaker really knew how to do really interesting things with the Daleks. And Terry Nation, dare I say it, if he didn't like the evil of the Daleks, the humanized Daleks, I think he... and it's possible to create something and then to get it wrong. I think he misunderstood an important element of his creations. And none of us are immune to that. I've run a comedy club for 23 years. I resisted some of the booking policies of it when some other people started to help me with it. And actually, I had to eventually realise that I was wrong, and that these things that were being done actually gave it a new lease of life and helped with its longevity. So just because you come up with something doesn't mean you necessarily know the best way to handle it. That's all I would say when it seems counterintuitive to say the man who created the Daleks perhaps didn't always get what worked best about them. I think David Whittaker, what he does with the Daleks makes them much more interesting. They're so cunning in power of the Daleks, and then here he takes everything that we know about them, and well, for certainly these 3 Daleks, and he has them playing trains, which I don't think I ever played trains, but it's obviously it's a sort of playground game. And that's a wonderful thing to do. This is... Maxtable has some odd moments in this episode that I'm not sure I've quite got my head round. The other thing that I've been able to do, because I've revisited this, I do like the dynamic between these two characters. They both go on a bit of a journey. I think Maxtable might go on a journey to Hamville, but I don't know. Goring was a good actor. And I think he gives it all he can. And actually, Maxtable is absurd. He thinks you can turn base metal into gold, and that the Daleks will help him with that. And there's this lovely wounded dignity to John Bailey's Waterfield. Ooh, and they have a bit of a scrap. Oh yes, he shouts murder a lot, I seem to recall. I wonder what this scene would have looked like. I've no idea. But what I didn't talk about throughout the whole of the commentary was I alluded to the fact that this was repeated, but I never mentioned that when this was repeated after episode 1 of The Wheel in Space, he's got scary eyes. There's a voiceover in episode 1. So the version that I heard, the soundtrack I had, was I'm talking through Maxtable going a bit bonkers here. He was a good enough actor to get away with it. He was also a rich enough actor to have given it quite a lot, and it does sound like he's giving it quite a lot. He shouts murder, murder, murder quite a lot, and then he shouts doctor, doctor, doctor quite a lot. But he has got a nice travelling bag. It's an old medical leather case. I like that. So Evil of the Daleks episode 1, the one that I had the soundtrack, is the one with the voiceover from Patrick Troughton and Wendy Padbury. So she says something like, so what are these Dalek things? And he goes, oh, well, they don't come into it yet. Because, of course, he says, I'll weave, at the end of Wheel in Space, says, I'm going to weave this into a story for you. So, and I think I mentioned before that, yes, the idea that his life is a series of television adventures. On episode 1 of my holiday, I enjoyed some sightseeing. But just before the commercial break of my meal, but so it's weaved into the continuity. The repeat is not just, it's not just at the end of Wheel in Space that he goes, here's a clip from Even the Daleks, and then it's just on telly next week. Actually, the following week, they went to the effort of having a voiceover from Troughton and Wendy Padbury to weave it into the narrative, at the end of Wheel in Space, and to act as a segue between that and Dominators, which starts with Zoe going, oh, I don't like them Daleks. So that's a really unusual thing. It's sort of like, it's a bit like a clip show now, where an episode of a series will go, do you remember when we did that thing? And then there's a 5-minute clip of them doing that thing, which was just a previous episode. Well, we had a 7-week story, and quite right too. It's glorious. So yes, the verbal tick we need to look for me, as well as saying verisimilitude and beguiled, is that if I go, yeah, it's interesting, because that means I don't really think it's interesting. I'm just trying to think of something interesting to say, which is odd, because this is the explosion of the house. This is a massive moment. This is where we've spent a story's worth, really, of adventure with Terrell and Ruth and Molly, but in the house. So the idea that we've blown the house up, it's still there. It has a lovely restaurant. And are moving on to the next part of the adventure feels, suitably epic, especially as this takes us to the planet Skaro for the first time since... Oh, she's lovely, isn't she? Since the first story. So I think if you were a young viewer of Doctor Who, this really felt like it was a pretty important development. And I think, and again, Chris Thompson's design, because that's the other thing I didn't really talk about enough in episode 1, is that it's Troughton and Jamie in the swinging 60s. It's an unusual mix, and because not much of this story is set in the 60s, that episode 1 is a thing to be cherished. Actually, Troughton and Jamie in the coffee bar with the music, that will have been in itself quite unusual. I know the Faceless Ones is in the 60s, but it's in an airport, so that's the hook. So this is really an epic, but unlike the Chase or the Keys of Marinus, where there's a sort of lot of changes of location, they're sort of quite cursory and broadly drawn sort of episodic interludes, whereas this really feels like they start in one place and there's a mystery, and then they go back in time and it feels like it's going to be this period drum with the Daleks, oddly out of place, and then they start doing this oddly out of place thing. The idea of the Daleks as children I think is gorgeous, but then that adventure is left behind and the Daleks sort of leave everyone for dead. They want to blow the house up, but we escape with them and come to Skaro, where we first met them, where we haven't been since their first adventure, also a 7-parter. I do like Kemmel and Victoria have a lovely relationship. I think they're very sweet. Oh, and the model work, yeah, we've got tantalizing bits of this model work. And yes, there's quite a lot of it in caves on the cliff face on the edge of the city, which we don't really remember, because we remember the bits in the house, we remember the bits in the Dalek city. It takes quite a lot of time to get there, and what's worth talking about, and the only bit where I think I said anything of much consequence on the first take of this was talking about the Emperor Dalek, where and what I'm going to do is at the end, so to prove that this isn't me cheating so that I can choose a different favourite thing, I'm going to go back in time at the end of this and go back to the original recording so you can see and hear what I chose the first time I did it. So I'm not revisiting this in order to choose something else. I love the image of Maxtable with his top hat, with his leather medical bag, with that long coat, looking every inch the sort of Victorian gentleman in a space corridor. Between two Daleks. Were they mocking him then? It's going, right. And of course, this is because he's a big actor and a big character. The fact that they're completely unflustered by him, and in fact quite mocking of him then, and quite bullying of him. This is, so on the one hand we've got the childish Daleks, but on the other hand they are cruel, they are evil, and none more so than in the way that they treat their, obviously foolish ally, but they're not fazed by him at all. There's no, they can use guile, but when they don't need to, they can just be pretty harsh. Was that what I need to check that that's what he was doing when he was saying you have no right? I'd not forgotten they'd done that. That's really unlike what we see Daleks do normally. I almost want to rewind that and do that again. That is the difficult thing with this, is because I've got to keep it interesting by keeping gab. It means I do run the risk of missing bits, and I'm having to use my prior knowledge of these adventures as I talk through them. Oh, and because this has been recorded after I've released some of my first ones and too much information, my rather fastidious history of episodes of Doctor Who, which take a lot of research and putting together. These tracks I come into the story with what I got in my head and what my friend has said about them, and that's it. So for better or worse, because otherwise I would just spend all of my time revising Doctor Who, and I've got to earn a living. I've got to walk my dog. But yes, the interesting alert, but this is interesting. There's a thing we don't know, or do we? This may have been cleared up. I meant to look at Gavin Rymill's website to give you the address. I might put it as a subtitle and maybe as a post credits thing on the audio to direct you, because he's done so much research about Daleks, and I think there's something about Dalek irises in. Is it this episode where you see a black iris in the Dalek? Oh, there's one where you see a black, but this is a recreation. Black iris in a Dalek for the first time. But as I say, that's all Gavin's area. But we've discussed, Gavin and I, whether the Emperor Dalek is in the studio. Roger Bunce, who was one of the cameramen on Evil of the Daleks, the CGI recreations of the Dalek City in this reconstruction are great. And I love that set anyway, so they've got good stuff to work from. Whether the Emperor Dalek, who we see at the... Oh, and there's another... Maxtable with his legs crossed, sitting on the floor. That's a really spooky image, bathed in the light, like bathed in a pool of light. That's a really spooky look. And again, we think of this as a sort of battle-hewn epic, but actually it's got some really strange... That mixture of the historical and the futuristic is a clash that is unusual, and it is that great Doctor Who thing. Never mind the Yeti on your loo in Tooting Beck. It's the Yeti on your Victorian loo in Tooting Beck is even better. But Roger Bunce, the cameraman, says that he was disappointed as a studio cameraman. Oh, that's great as well. The Dalek coming out of the darkness. Again, this is just a reconstruction I'm watching, but they've done such good work on it. The Emperor Dalek, I can't see anything. That's really upsetting and unsettling. The Emperor Dalek, according to Roger Bunch, they were... Oh, yes, that's an off. I will get to this point about the Emperor Dalek, but I keep being interested in what's going on, which is good, because the previous take of this, I just said a lot and watched. Believe me, if you think I'm taking a long time to get to the point, I didn't get to a point last time, I don't think, or it took me 22 minutes. But yes, a lot of this happens off screen, so Maxtable's just gone off into the darkness. They use darkness really well with this. So we heard all that screaming and stuff, and Maxtable was off. And now Victoria's off. She's not in darkness, but she's off camera. So they're using what we can hear, but not see, and that's always terribly scary because your imagination does the work. It's a very nice trick of scripting and direction, that. But listen, Roger Bunce, the cameraman, said that they were disappointed as studio cameramen, because remember, studio cameramen would not have been at the film studios in Ealing. That the Emperor Dalek set was not in the studio. It was according to Roger, just at Ealing. And if you look at the telesnaps, there's no telesnaps of the Emperor in episode 6. So you can't, because sometimes you can tell from the quality of a telesnap if it's filmed material or if it's the studio. Not always, but you can. There is sometimes a difference in quality. You can tell. But we've got no shot of the Emperor from episode 6. And apparently that starts in darkness and the light blinks on to reveal. That will have been the most amazing thing in Doctor Who ever. I wish we could see that. And if we could, it might clear up whether the Dalek... It's less important, but it's a nice thing to think about as to whether the Dalek Emperor is just on film or not. Now, Gavin suggested to me that... there's a publicity shot of Victoria, Deborah Watling, in front of the Emperor, where his hosiery is differently placed. The sort of pipes and things coming out of it is differently placed from how it is in the cine footage that we have of the Ealing Film Studios. So that's a suggestion that there's a different set of the Emperor that is in the studio that didn't quite marry with the film. But I've also read that the Victoria photo shoot took place at Ealing, although Gavin suggested, I think it was Gavin, or somebody suggested that because I know Simon Guerrier's looked into this as well, there's a suggestion that Deborah Watling wasn't a dealing at the same time the Emperor stuff was filmed. Well, she might not have been filming, but there's no reason she might not have been separately called for a photo call. I don't know. There's enough doubt. It may have been solved now definitively, but last time I looked and thought about it, there was enough of an element of doubt that we've got another sort of little Doctor Who mystery to solve. Is the Emperor Dalek in the studio, that brilliant, big, amazing set, or was it just used in film sequences? And the fact that they went to all that trouble to build this amazing prop that is actually, in one episode. And of course there were different props built as well, because they blow one up, which is a lighter weight balsa wood one. So then there's the element of, well, what were the pipes on that different to the pipes? So we have different emperors. We have different filming days. They went back and refilmed extra stuff. So there's enough mystery there. Look, there he is. And he's got the great voice as well. It's the slightly more booming voice. Now, on this recon, we don't get the lights blinking on, but I believe, and he's got those flashing lights along his crown. I think you saw those first, and then the lights came on. We meet at last. I wondered if we ever would. And I just think, I would love to see this. And of course, this ties in with what I was talking about with episode 1 of the Doctor doing all his deduction to actually lead him into a trap. He's been working on the whole human factor thing and the whole Dalek factor thing, this nebulous sciencey thing, and he's gone, aha, but I've got these Daleks, I've given them the human factor, I've done what you wanted me to do, but I've double-crossed you, because I've beaten you and I don't care what you do to me now. That's the second Doctor, absolutely. I've done it, and you're probably going to do something, and I don't care. Sort of childish, it's obtuse, it's intelligent, it's calculating, but it's also got this weird sort of innocence about the way it is phrased and delivered, this childlike thing. But actually what has happened is the Daleks have the last laugh as far as episode 6 is concerned, because the human factor shows us what the Dalek factor. This is the confident swagger about the science that doesn't really mean anything, human factor and Dalek factor. But the consequence is that your discovery, Doctor, is going to enable us to do the thing that we want to do. So you're partly responsible for this nebulous thing. Oh, and there's the light blinking on the TARDIS. Oh, maybe it was the light blinking on the TARDIS. I may be wrong there. But maybe a lot of things are in darkness and the light comes on. There's a lot of light and dark. And that's the first time we've seen the TARDIS since episode 1 as well. So it really feels like an epic sort of coming together. And that... Oh, and I know... And I'm going to sort of slightly spoilerize the ending, because I scrabble for things to choose for episode 7, which, in terms of chronologically, I haven't done yet, but in real life I have, because this is a re-record of episode 6, is that I don't choose Dudley Simpson's music. And Dudley Simpson does great work throughout most of Doctor Who, but I'm not sure his music's ever one of the best things about the story. He's almost it's like good lighting in the theatre. It's so good you almost don't notice it. His score for this is epic and discordant, and this perversion of the Doctor Who theme that has the sense of encroaching doom about it, but also grandeur, and it's a beautiful score. And I don't choose it, and I don't choose it for episode 6 either, because, as I said, I was not going to cheat. I'm going to go back to the past, where I did my original, very boring, quiet at the back. If you think, God, if that one was boring, if judging by this one, if that one was boring, it must be really awful. Look, I wanted to do you a better one than I did, so I've done it again. And at least and the other thing was, I was chomping on a naked bar. I've got to be careful how I phrase that for the... because which was fine for the video, but for the audio it sounded awful, because just doing that. And on the video it looked fine. I was chomping on a naked bar. You've got to watch the grammar there as well, because obviously if I was chomping naked on a bar, that would have been fine for the audio, but awful for the video. But it sounded... So not only was I being boring, I was being boring whilst eating something. And it sounded like... I mean, it could have been doing anything. I could have been noshing off a hamster from what it sounded like. I wasn't. So it was slightly ignorant in the fact that I was chomping away, and also it wasn't very good. So anyway, I hope that was better. Certainly, I don't think was worse. But now we're going to go back in time to the original track that I recorded to prove that I'm not cheating and to show you what I originally chose and would still choose, with honourable mention to Dudley Simpson, as my favourite thing. So by the power of static electricity, I'm going to go into a cupboard over there and travel back in time.
My best thing in episode 6 is the Doctor meeting the Emperor Dalek on Skaro. I wondered if we ever would, says the Doctor, as if I wonder if we ever would, says the Doctor, as if it's been on his mind for a while. And I wonder how the Doctor even knows that there is a Dalek Emperor. Has he been reading the comic strips in TV Century 21? My best thing in episode 7.
Well, we'll have to wait for episode 7. I'm doing well. This is good. I think I've got 3 out of 6. So if I get what Simon chooses for episode 7, I've won. And what does that mean? Well, the rules are about as sort of solid and set in stone as the whole idea about Dalek/human factor. The science of the rules is not entirely fully formed, and what's at stake isn't entirely clear, but it's nonetheless all terribly exciting. I should be going to bed, but I can't bail out now. So this is the end of this episode. Okay, before we embark on episode 7 of Evil of the Daleks, I'd just like to emphasise that there's a website I talk about throughout this commentary, mentioning the good work done on it by Gavin Rymil. Gavin has asked me to point out, quite rightly, that although he did a lot of work on it, the site was set up, and much of the work, including some mentioned in these episode commentaries that I've done, was done by John Green. So apologies to John. I ramble off the top of my head rather than research these commentaries, so it leads to the odd oversight of this nature, and I'm more than happy to set the record straight and to point you in the direction of John Green and Gavin Rymil's website, which is called Dalek6388 and can be found at dalek6388.co.uk. Welcome, everybody. It's been 7 episodes for you. It's been one long night for me. I've done it all in a night. I wasn't sure I planned to, but it does give it a feeling of it being an epic, like watching a big old movie. But of course, I could have watched it over the course of 2 months, like it was intended to be done. Anyway, before we reach the final end, we've got the final 25 minutes of Evil of the Daleks, episode 7. Press play now. Yeah, absolutely. Slick as you like. I mean, I could cheat. There's no point, is there? Right. Well, this feels like... It does feel like the end of an epic. And of course, it's the end of the season as well. So Doctor Who was really building up. The first season ended with the Reign of Terror, didn't it? I suppose the first block ended with Dalek Invasion of Earth, so that was a bit of a bang. But so yes, the TARDIS. It's such an extraordinary prop, that Emperor. And thanks to Tony Cornell, who was the technician who took all that stuff at Ealing, also did some of the filming, that did the city filming at Fury from the Deep as well. That means we've got some behind the scenes footage of that as well. How glorious that we have that. It's a thing of majesty, that Emperor Dalek. Hats off to Chris Thompson, who'd been a design assistant, because you can see in that early years book his name's on the design sheets. He was the draftsman on some of the Raymond Cusick stuff. But this is his only Doctor Who, but what a one to do. Jamie has got Kennedy's jumper. What's that all about? How bizarre. I suppose it's a Jacobite thing to do, to go around plundering corpses. Is that what he did? And I don't mean just Jacobites. I mean people in times of, those sorts of battles, didn't they? After the battle was done, you'd go around, getting things off dead bodies. Jamie really means business. So of course we're at the dawn of a classic TARDIS crew of the Doctor, Jamie and Victoria. There's a lot of, from these telesnaps, there are a lot of high angle shots which do add a certain, great visual. I do trust Derek Martinus. All of his Doctor Who stuff looks really good. I did meet him once at a convention, but only, I got him to sign a book. We did try to get him involved in the DVDs. He was still alive when we were doing many of them, but he was too poorly, sadly. Now, of course, in the great scheme of things, it's just sad that somebody was poorly in old age. Not that we didn't get their memories of Doctor Who. But he's a very good director. He's great, the Doctor. I do love the second Doctor. I would say that Troughton is probably my favourite Doctor. I just think it's such an interesting characterisation that's quite unlike anything else. I don't know anybody like the second Doctor, and yet I totally believe in him. And yet, I don't know how you arrive at that characterisation. And it's genuine eccentricity. It's never forced, but also I think it's because his skill with comedy is equalled by his skill with drama. He is a man of great gravitas, and he projects a sort of searing, busy intelligence, and also a sort of absent-minded, childlike. It's the fact that he's a sort of innocent, and yet he's quite dark. I'm annoyed I talked over the bit earlier, but in one of the earlier episodes where I've mentioned it before, where he sort of acknowledges to Waterfield that I might end a race. Oh, he knows the gravitas of what he's doing. Credit to Dudley Simpson too. The score knows that this is big stuff. And there's an echo, isn't there? It's not just the Emperor's voice, but it's the sense of scale within the must be the set, I guess. And seeing the Daleks, this must as to be a 7-year-old in. I know I shouldn't covet. I remember. It's a terrible. I remember when the actor Gary Holton from Auf Wiedersehen Pet died very young during the filming of a series, and it was headline news. And I remember working out that because it said how old he was, I worked out when he was born, and I worked out that he would have been old enough to see most of the Doctor Who's that I wasn't born to see. And even though I was sad that he died, I was sort of envious of him that he'd been born at a time which meant that he could see all of these classics that I would never see. Doctor Who was my life. Doctor Who was what I thought about all of the time. I wonder if it still is. What am I doing now? It's 3:00 in the morning. I should be in bed. I've got a dog. I've got a lovely partner. I've got so much to do around the house. I've got to earn a living, but I feel the need to connect and to reinvigorate my connection with Doctor Who. And I've never done this before. I've watched them all in order, written a book about watching them all in order. I worry about Maxtable's transformation at this point. Marius Goring has already had a fairly healthy portion of the scenery, and that's before he goes through the Dalek Arch. And if he had mad eyes before, he's got mad Dalek eyes afterwards. The music's loving it though, isn't it? It's really chilling music, and actually that reveal of him with his scary Dalek face done properly, I think might well have, but could have been really unsettling. It could also have been slightly comical. As is it Spinal Tap says, there's a fine line between clever and stupid. And I think I worry that he does that. I don't know why I get that impression. I just worry that when he's a Dalek, he does that. But I'm sure he doesn't. I might have just made that up. I wouldn't put it past him. I love this Emperor. And the sort of hose things hanging off the ceiling that give it a sort of sprawling. It's like it's got its own sort of spider's web into the very fabric of the building. Yeah, he's a Dalek like Maxtable. Yeah, this Dudley Simpson is doing great work here. Again, somebody. If Mark Ayres was doing this, he'd be able to describe what this music was. But would he know which Three Musketeers Gary Watson was in? No. Yeah. That's quite arch, isn't it? He's been through a Dalek arch, so now he's an arch Dalek. I suppose that's perfectly acceptable. It's actually quite spooky though. I'm worrying about the comical because I worry because I'm a Doctor Who fan. But actually this could be really, because it's quite dehumanizing, isn't it? He's dehumanized. He's Dalekized. He's got the Dalek factor. Which, you know, and that's the thing about the Daleks, isn't it? It's that they take away our humanity, our subtlety. This is what interests me when we look at some of the arguments that people have about Doctor Who, and like you know, whether it was politically correct, I hate that phrase, but for want of a better one, in the past, and how we can loftily judge it through the prism of today. And I certainly think it's worth being aware of the things that make us uncomfortable as a modern viewer. But then when anyone tries to sort of introduce the other side of that argument or to add some nuance to it, there's some people who believe they're very good people who get very cross because they're on the side of righteousness. And but of course the Daleks teach us is that the ones you have got to worry about are the ones that are convinced they're right. I hope I'm right. I'm a liberal kind of guy, but I acknowledge that liberalism has inherent contradictions within it, and today's liberalism can be wielded quite illiberally. And as I say, some of the people that think they're the best of us are so convinced of their own righteousness that they're actually closer to the Daleks because they know they're right. I just hope I am. Especially about the Dalek Emperor being on film and not in the studio, because I don't like being... But I'm always... I think it's healthy to always... I've always assumed I'm wrong. And you're not disappointed when somebody goes, I think you'll find... But of course, the viewer here is, feels that they're part of an epic. So that the idea that the Doctor, might have been Dalekized, that's about as bad as it gets. Of course, it's a story of deceit and manipulation, and the Doctor is lying again. I hadn't quite realised that. I've not thought of it in this way at all until now. That's the beauty about revisiting Doctor Who over and over again. There's always something new to see or to imagine or to ponder on. This is a story of a series of manipulations, which I think is really interesting. It's much more of a sort of game of chess in a way, although it's a sort of game of chess where you just lie to each other. Did you just move pawn to queen 4? No, I moved rook to... Did you? Yeah. And of course, the Doctor has to ask Jamie to trust him, and Jamie's lost his trust in the Doctor twice already. So that's brilliant, and I hadn't realised that either. So that's sort of the ultimate test of their friendship, is that after all they've been through, the Doctor's now saying, go through this arch that's turned Maxtable into an eccentric performance. And of course, poor old wretched Waterfield, he's got his daughter back, but of course we always knew of Victoria when introduced her as a companion. She was the orphan Victoria, so he was always doomed. And yeah, of course, and a Dalek question a thing? No, there's no questioning. Well, that's just that's. And we've got the sound effect, the dum dum boom 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 Dalek control room sound effect. I love the fact again it's Doctor Who, even a sound effect, because they've used that sound effect in modern Doctor Who, haven't they? The cloister bell, something as simple as a sound effect, using the same sound effect as the one that I remember from my childhood, just gives me a little frisson, a little dance of joy. And it's funny, because I wasn't a particularly happy child. Doctor Who was it was my refuge. So the fact that I'm now nostalgic for my childhood, I think it's because I realise I should have enjoyed myself a lot more than I did. Because if you think childhood's hard, you wait till you become an adult. And I sort of look back and wish I'd enjoyed myself a little bit more and worried a little bit less. But nostalgia is a really powerful tool. Oh, I wish we could see this. Why have we got episode 2 and we haven't got any of the others? What happened to the other episodes that were with episode 2? Go on, please be somewhere. I remember when episode 2 came back, because as I say, it was for me, it was one of the ones that came back. It was a completely missing story. And there'd been, I mean, I wasn't part of fandom, but there were episodes that sort of seemed more likely to turn up, but Evil just seemed, completely out of question because there weren't any others. Seemed no rhyme. So when Evil 2, it was Evil 2 and Faceless Ones 3 came back at the same time. And I saw it for the first time at a convention. They put it on the big cinema in the afternoon, and I watched it and was absolutely amazed by how good it was. Dizzy Daleks. I love that. That's so peculiar. I mean, isn't it weird? It's so clever because, of course, the Dalek is played by every child in the playground, and suddenly they've taken that impact that they've had on popular culture and made the Daleks sort of imitate the children who play them. I'm sure they weren't thinking as loftily as I'm sort of pretentiously throwing it in now, but I do think that's a really interesting thing to do. The Daleks I grew up with didn't scream when they died and didn't have pain. You know, they were much more staccato, and you know, they were straightforward, and they came and they shot and they blew up, and they do actually sort of scream with pain quite a lot, don't they, in the 60s, or which I don't associate with them. It's a relatively new thing for me, although, you know, I've been used to it for 20 odd years now, but it still sort of almost surprises me when they do it. I love this. We've got tantalizing glimpses of Dalek goo, and of course the the suggestion of something organic is always a bit exciting with a Dalek, because we think of them as, you know, machine creatures. We know there's something inside, but when we get a glimpse, and it's good enough for a cliffhanger in the first story, but yeah, just a bit of goo, and it's suddenly, oh, do we feel like we've seen a bit of the Dalek? And again, I sort of think we benefit from only seeing glimpses. Our tendency now to want to see, I think, spoils the idea that we for so long we didn't. I think picturing what's there is much more exciting. Imagine the size of the mutant inside the Emperor. We've got all this beautiful cine film of this brilliant set, and the Dalek battle. This, I mean, to be a 7-year-old in 1967, watching the Daleks fighting each other, and you do not fight in here. All of that. This is amazing. And of course, what Edward Waterfield does is he saves the Doctor. Oh, doesn't he say something like a good life to save? Actually, on the evidence of the Doctor, this story. But you were always, I think, gonna get killed. I think, Edward Waterfield. A good life to save. Oh, it is a lovely performance from John Bailey. Good actor. Also turns up later as Sezom in The Horns of Naimon. And I remember, because I'd remembered that character I remember reading the cast list for The Horns of Naimon and realising that I'd seen an actor from Evil of the Daleks in action in a Doctor Who that I'd watched, because I remember The Horns of Naimon first time around. That seemed terribly exciting. I worry about the Louis Marks Daleks. And isn't it fun? Because we don't see the Daleks for another 5 years after this. Isn't that extraordinary? So, if you were 8 when this was on, you didn't see the Daleks again till you were 12. That's a lifetime. The idea now that there'd be 5 years between Dalek appearances. And actually, I think, because I remember when Remembrance was, because I saw Destiny, then you didn't see them again till Resurrection. And then I remember when Remembrance came on, it seemed like they hadn't been there for ages, because of course time moves at a different speed when you're a teenager, but it seemed like a real event. Oh, this is amazing. That Emperor Dalek explosion is amazing. I mean, it's a kapow. It's a kablam. Yeah, now, of course, the one that blows up is a different prop to the main one, so that could explain the 2 different sets of wires, which could mean that it wasn't in studio. I don't know. I'm just saying it's not cut and dried, and it is debatable, and it is interesting. And the debate might well have been solved, but it hasn't in my head. Oh, yes. Yes, this is a horrible bit. kill. So that's the Dalek in Maxtable's head, is it? It's not quite clear what's going on here. And in the Doctor Who archives of this, I'm sure Maxtable and Kemmel both went over the cliff. I thought that's how Maxtable died, that him and Kemmel both went off the cliff together. But actually, he doesn't. He goes back to the city. And I'm not sure we see Maxtable die, which is really interesting. We hear him, he has a bit of a rant later on and goes back into the city. But unless he gets killed by a Dalek or you see him walk down a corridor that then blows up, it's not entirely clear. I've not seen the script. That's an amazing explosion. There's a lot of pyrotechnics there. And I think nowadays where the Daleks, sometimes are guests in another story, or they'll crop up to be a peripheral part of the story. I think takes away from them a little bit. It takes away from their headline grabbing that they unless they're wheeled out for a special occasion. So now it's possible that something there happens to Maxtable after he's delivered a line, "Rule forever." Now, does something fall on him? Does a Dalek kill him? I don't know, because it cuts away to the city blowing up and stuff pretty straight after his line. So it's not clear what happens to Maxtable. Perhaps he's still there to fight another day. But this is such a sort of epic. And I'm not disparaging the modern Who, which I love. I think the Daleks, if they become part of the furniture, you don't get that frisson of it's a Dalek story, I actually think, like the Emperor Dalek only really being in this episode and the end of episode 6, that if things are rationed, it becomes a bit more special. And the Daleks were a big deal when I was a kid. And they're only in the Tom Baker era twice, for goodness sake. I mean, this sounds amazing. And again, I trust Derek Martinez to have done a decent job. And of course, it ends on all of this sort of battle-y, but there's supposed to just be a glimmer, isn't there, of the light within the Emperor, because Sidney Newman had said, make it, give us hope, just in case. Ken Tilson, I've forgotten he was a Dalek. He's a Sensorite and I think a garbage cone. He's never talked of much as a Dalek operator. He's another one that got away. I kept meaning to write to him because we didn't get him for the Sensorites commentary because he lived too far away. So I thought, I'll write to him so I can complete all the Sensorites people. And then he died, sadly. Dalek fight directed by Timothy Coombs. So that's nice that he gets that credit. And he's a good director too. So again, I do worry about the Louis Marks Daleks. And yeah, Louis Marks wrote Day of the Daleks. So that's quite... Isn't it odd that two people with the name is associated in two different ways with the Daleks? My favourite thing about Evil of the Daleks, episode 7, is the Dalek Civil War. It looks amazing. That model shot of the Dalek blowing up and going into the sky as well. It looks from those tantalising behind-the-scenes clips, which, don't tell us what we would have seen. It could have been filmed really badly, but I don't think so. I do worry slightly about the Louis Marks Daleks because they're a different shape. But it sounds amazing. And that explosion of the Emperor and the Emperor is so good. Yeah, please. Dalek Civil War. That's my thing. What's Simon Guerrier's episode 7 thing?
My best thing in episode 7 is the scale of the final end. Brilliantly, designer Chris Thompson built a model and a full set of Scaro so that there were lots of ways to really go to town on the battle. They had days of filming at Ealing, and then, having already done that, they went back and did some more with a second unit directed by Timothy Combe. We know there were Daleks exploding and bits of blobby creatures inside. We know they had extra time to edit this epic together. I mean, we know so much about this big battle at the end. It's so tantalising and yet gone. Gosh, how does anyone sleep at night knowing that? And then you want a bonus thing.
Oh, I've forgotten. I want a bonus thing. I want my own rule. I've forgot my own rules. And how does anyone sleep? Well, I'm not sleeping at night. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not sleeping. I do miss. He's right about that battle. And yeah, they did. I forget they did go back. So there's so much there. Oh, I miss that with every fibre of my being. Isn't that terrible? Why chuck away such a story that was good enough to repeat? Anyway, so look, I got the same as Simon then. I did last week. I did for episode 5. I didn't for episode 1. I didn't for episode 2. I did for episode 3. I didn't for episode 4. So it's 4-3 to me at the moment. I don't know what that means, but I'm certainly doing better than I think I have so far in this process, and better than I expected to do. So now I'm slightly nervous because I've got. Do I choose one more thing, or is it that he chooses something, and if it ties in with and if it's the same as one of my other ones, I don't know. It's 4-3 to me, and he's going to choose one more thing. So I'll choose one more thing. And if I choose the same as him, I get a point. And if he chooses something I don't choose, he gets a point. And it becomes a rather disappointing tie. I don't think I've ever won or come close to, because, the chance of choosing the same thing. Simon's a writer. But I feel bad because I haven't chosen John Bailey's performance as Edward Waterfield, which I think has a sort of cracked dignity about it, and really lends, our sort of paternalistic view of the paternalism that we feel towards Victoria because she's an orphan, but she's not just an orphan; she's an orphan of a really sad man. And because it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd love to think of something clever. No, all right, John Bailey as Edward Waterfield, because I think he's great. I bet Simon hasn't chosen that. I bet I've just been standing in the open goal to seal victory at the last minute before the final whistle, and I've skied it.
So my bonus thing about the Evil of Daleks is something pointed out by clever Alan Barnes in Doctor Who magazine. As we know, the production team originally asked Pauline Collins to be their new companion while they were recording the previous story, The Faceless Ones. So, Alan asked, where would her character, Samantha Briggs, have fitted into this story, given it was made very soon after that decision? Well, I think Alan's right that Sam would largely have taken the part played by Molly in the story. But it's fun to listen to the story of the Evil of Daleks now and imagine Sam in that role, and then helping rescue Victoria. And that's the image I'd like to leave you with, Toby. Sam Briggs on Skaro, in that hat, giving the Emperor what for. Good night.
So okay, it's what it's what could have happened. I like that. I mean, we could play that game with anything. What could have happened? Well, it could be that Theodore Maxwell was played by Laurence Olivier, or it could be that every time a Dalek explodes in episode 6, you win £1 million. We all lived in it. If wishes were horses, Alan Barnes and Simon Guerrier. But so I wouldn't anyway. Yes. It is nice to play with the... Well, Ben and Polly were supposed to be in episode 2. Annika Wills and Michael Craze were contracted to episode 2, but then Innes Lloyd, the destroyer Lloyd, who just when he doesn't like a companion, just gets rid of them as soon as possible, halfway through a story, if you like, because they disappear in the Faceless Ones. I mean, they don't even get to take part in the bulk of that story. But yeah, they were supposed to be there and I think in early storylinings they were there until they left in episode 2. And you go, oh, that's unimaginable. They essentially leave in episode 2 of the Faceless Ones and then just come back for a bit of film. But I'm sure I'll talk about that when somebody nominates the Faceless Ones, which hasn't happened yet. That was my first missing story for this. I think we made a good fist of it. I certainly love it. I certainly miss it. I haven't got any money, but I would pay good money. What would I do? I would do some form of incantation. I'd do some deal with, I'm not going to attempt, I was just about to say, I would do a deal with the devil to get it back, because I'd suddenly got really spooked by saying that. And I would worry that if it then turned up next week, somehow my soul would have gone down below. So anything supernatural and Kabbalistic and satanic aside, I would go to a lot of effort in order to save those episodes from destruction or rescue them from whatever cupboard they might be in some archival backwater. Yeah, maybe one day we can do this again and the pictures will be moving. That's worth hoping for, isn't it? And on that note, perhaps then we can say for Evil of the Daleks, it's potentially not the final end. Thanks to my guest, Simon Guerrier, who typically was one of the first people on board with this podcast/videocast, because he's just enthusiastic and very kind and helpful. And why wasn't I surprised, as I say, was when he was one of the first people to send me a package. And what a package it is. Not a coincidence he's chosen Evil of the Daleks, because he has written an excellent book about it. It's one of the Black Archive books from Obverse Books, and he's gone into intense and certifiable detail, as is the style of those excellent books, which I can heartily recommend. From Obverse Books, The Black Archive. Number 11 is Simon's Evil of the Daleks. You have been listening to Happy Times and Places, presented by me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest was Simon Guerrier. Special thanks to this episode's featured patrons, Jeff Kaplan, Andy Kitching, Hendrik Korzeniowski, Guy Lambert, Nate Lynch, Sean McAllister, Pip Maidley, Nick Mellish, Russell Parker, Ken Patterson, Monsieur Poirot, Gavin Rymill, Jim Sangster, Paul Shields, Richard Smith, David Spencer, Adam Stone, Paul Taylor-Greaves, Sidney Trout, Alistair Wallace, Kevin West, John Williams, Sidney Wilson, and Pascal Zierke. The music was by Dave Gates and the podcast artwork by Dylan Patterson. Please remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and please do rate 5 stars if you can, and review these on whatever podcast platform you get them from. And you can go to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, where there are exclusives and advance releases if you choose to be a patron, or you can do a one-off payment at kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. No obligation, of course, and my immense gratitude to you just for being here in the first place and for listening. Thank you so much.